Now Haesoo continued down the road, her mind still occupied by the conversation she had just had with the real estate agent. He had warned her that the apartment she wanted carried an unusual reputation. Rumors claimed that the place was haunted, and according to local stories, nobody who moved in managed to stay longer than a month. Tenant after tenant had left, causing the owner to lose hope of finding someone willing to live there. Because of this history, the rent had been reduced dramatically, not as a promotional offer, but simply because people avoided the apartment. For a moment, Haesoo imagined what would happen if a ghost truly appeared there. She wondered how she and Taeha would react in such a bizarre situation. The agent had advised her to consider other properties, insisting that the apartment still gave off an unsettling atmosphere. Despite his concerns, she chose to accept it anyway. Before they parted, he jokingly remarked that in today's economy, the rent was often scarier than any supernatural spirit. As she walked, she pictured the apartment bathed in warm sunlight. The idea of sharing a comfortable living space with Taeha filled her with quiet happiness. Soon afterward, however, her attention was caught by a flyer attached to a utility pole. The faded and unclear writing on it created an odd feeling in her chest. She couldn't explain why, but something about the moment seemed strangely wrong. Her thoughts drifted to a coworker who had recently recommended a newly opened cafe, praising both its coffee and desserts. Although the place sounded appealing, Haesoo still preferred another nearby cafe when it came to coffee. Her coworker had teased her, suggesting she should visit the new place with her husband on a date. Haesoo merely replied that the prices seemed a little too expensive for an ordinary lunch. She remembered how she once believed such cafes were not meant for someone like her. That opinion had changed after she visited one while holding Taeha's hand. Since then, places like that no longer felt distant. Now she found herself considering practical matters instead. Perhaps she should look for a weekend part-time job nearby. Maybe, after a few months, she could even return to full-time work. Still, she wasn't entirely sure whether she could handle such a commitment. Elsewhere, An Seo sat quietly inside a club, slowly drinking while repeatedly checking her phone. Taeha still hadn't answered any of her messages. Since the director himself had provided the number, she was confident it was correct. Nevertheless, his complete silence irritated her. At one point, she even considered blocking him out of frustration. As she sat there, old memories surfaced once again. She recalled a party she had attended in the past. During that event, she had spoken with Taeha's mother, apologizing for everything that had happened. She admitted she had never expected Taeha to leave her behind so abruptly, especially considering it had been the first time she had experienced something like that. Taeha's mother listened calmly. Seo explained that everyone present had avoided looking directly at one another, making the entire situation awkward for him as well. Even so, she confessed she was grateful to have met him. Taeha's mother responded warmly, telling her that she liked her. She even asked whether Seo would continue supporting Taeha and stay close to him through church activities. That conversation remained vivid in Seo's memory. Another memory followed. She remembered looking at Taeha's hands and noticing how large and strong they seemed. Later, while sitting at a bar, she jokingly asked the bartender to compare hand sizes with her. When he laughed and questioned her motives, she insisted she was only curious. The comparison only reinforced her earlier thought. There was simply no comparison at all. Her mind shifted once more to the moment they had first been introduced. She had politely introduced herself as An Seo and extended her hand. Taeha eventually accepted the handshake. What should have been a brief greeting lasted longer than expected. Their eyes remained locked in silence for several seconds before either of them finally looked away. Remembering it now left her with a confusing mixture of irritation and lingering emotion. She couldn't shake the feeling that Taeha never paid attention to those small moments that had meant something to her. A teasing comment from the bartender pulled her back to the present, though her thoughts remained restless. The story then moved to Min Chol. At the office, Min Chol casually announced that he was heading out. After he left, several co-workers began discussing him. One pointed out that he had seemed unusually cheerful recently. Normally, Min Chol carried a stern expression and rarely looked pleased about anything. Lately, however, something about him appeared different. Another coworker immediately recognized the change. According to him, it was the unmistakable look of someone who had recently fallen in love. The others reacted with surprise. They reminded him that Min Chol had supposedly been seeing Ari for quite some time. If his theory was correct, then perhaps there was another woman involved. The conversation quickly turned into speculation. One person argued that attractive men often took advantage of their appearance when it came to relationships. Another disagreed, insisting that Min Chol didn't seem like the type to behave irresponsibly. While smoking and chatting, they continued analyzing him from afar. Eventually, they brought up the newest employee. They noted that her expression noticeably changed whenever Min-chul was nearby. Since she had joined only a few days earlier, the topic soon shifted into broader observations about attraction and how people often overlook genuinely decent men. Not long afterward, the new employee sat alone in the cafeteria, stirring her coffee while smiling to herself. She seemed lost in pleasant thoughts until the atmosphere around her changed. A few women nearby became visibly irritated about something. The newcomer neither apologized nor responded, which only increased the awkward tension between them. Meanwhile, Min-chul returned to his office and settled into his chair. As he walked in, he couldn't help laughing to himself. The more he thought about recent events, the more amusing they seemed. He had convinced himself that a tiny studio apartment would never be sufficient. Since he believed he was living with his husband, a larger apartment felt necessary. He still misunderstood the earlier conversation and assumed that was what Haesoo had been referring to. Chuckling, he thought about how often she mentioned her husband and remembered once telling her not to discuss such matters publicly. Although he had intended to reprimand her for ignoring his messages, he decided to let it slide for now. At that moment, the new employee entered carrying a cup of coffee. Cheerfully, she explained that she had made it herself and offered it to him. Min-chul accepted with a polite thank you, but inwardly he became suspicious. As he watched her, he quietly wondered what her real intentions might be. A little later, Min-chul glanced across the office, looked out at the rain falling beyond the windows, and moved closer to the wall to answer a phone call. His voice was firm as he demanded that the additional payment be transferred. On the other end, the investigator responded with sarcasm, claiming they couldn't simply produce people out of nowhere. Min-chul reminded him that they had promised to bring the woman directly to him. He questioned why they kept requesting more money, despite failing to locate her address properly. Holding a cigarette, he criticized their lack of professionalism and pointed out that 5 lakh was a significant amount of money. He wanted to know exactly what they intended to do. He admitted he currently lacked the funds, but emphasized that he had personally confirmed the woman was alive and unharmed. He had even seen her searching for apartments. If necessary, he could locate her himself. After all, finding her was supposed to be their responsibility, not his. The investigator then revealed additional information. According to him, the woman was trapped in a difficult situation. She owed substantial debts, lacked stable employment, and struggled to keep up with interest payments. Unscrupulous people were reportedly taking advantage of her circumstances. He suggested that her condition was far more serious than Min-chul realized. He even implied that if her husband had known about everything sooner, she might not have been abandoned to face it alone. Throughout the conversation, Min-chul remained outwardly calm. Leaning back in his chair, he listened in silence while rain tapped steadily against the window, adding weight to the already tense atmosphere. Elsewhere, Taeha appeared calm and observant as ever. His expression remained controlled and thoughtful, as though he was connecting pieces of information long before anyone else. Without saying much, he projected quiet confidence and intelligence. He moved through events with a composed awareness that made him stand out naturally. The investigator continued speaking, mentioning that they had already earned enough money and could choose to stop their involvement. Even so, he questioned whether Min-chul was truly comfortable with the situation. His tone carried uncertainty, almost as though he expected a different answer. Min-chul offered no immediate response. Instead, he allowed the silence to linger. Rain continued striking the glass while the tension hung heavily in the room. In contrast, the image of Taeha remained unchanged, steady, analytical, and composed. His calm eyes suggested that he was already several steps ahead, examining every possibility without allowing emotion or confusion to distract him, maintaining an almost untouchable sense of control despite the growing uncertainty around him. Taeha stood near the roadside, speaking calmly with a real estate broker. His expression was steady and controlled, giving the impression that he had already accounted for every possibility. Across the street, Jay observed him from a distance. The longer he watched, the stronger his discomfort became. There was something about Taeha that felt different now, something he couldn't easily explain. Thinking back, Jay admitted that Taeha had never been particularly ordinary, especially where Haesoo was concerned. In the past, however, his behavior had seemed almost harmless. Beneath his polite exterior was a stubborn and intense personality, yet he always made an effort to appear kind and dependable in front of the woman he loved. There had even been something slightly pathetic about the way he threw himself into his feelings, becoming completely absorbed by them. It was the sort of devotion that could be laughed at from a distance. Now, however, it no longer felt amusing. The bond between Taeha and Haesoo had deepened far beyond what it once was. They had reached a point where neither seemed willing to let go of the other, regardless of the consequences. Taeha's attachment had become serious and undeniable. He wasn't simply interested in her anymore, he was deeply in love. Jay found himself unable to ignore that fact. His thoughts drifted back to the time Taeha had vanished without warning. Days later, he had unexpectedly appeared in a strange bar, leaving everyone confused and worried. Since then, every development seemed to push the situation further in the wrong direction. From Jay's perspective, things had already entered dangerous territory, and he feared they might become even worse. The focus shifted to Min-chul. He sat quietly in his office when his manager approached carrying a cup of coffee. The older man spoke politely, praising Min-chul's abilities and admitting that the company was fortunate to have someone as talented as him. At the same time, he apologized for being unable to offer better compensation, expressing genuine regret about the company's limitations. Once they sat facing each other, the atmosphere quickly changed. Min-chul responded with visible irritation. He questioned whether the manager truly understood the seriousness of his situation and reminded him that he was facing a significant personal crisis. The manager attempted to explain. He mentioned another employee, Manager Kim, who was also experiencing financial hardship and had not received an advance payment either. According to him, giving special treatment to one employee while refusing another would be unfair and difficult to justify. Min-chul cut directly to the point and asked whether that meant he would receive nothing. The manager hesitated before clarifying that it was not a matter of refusing him personally. The company simply did not have the resources to provide the money. The answer was effectively no. Without wasting another second, Min-chul rose from his chair. His decision seemed immediate and absolute. He informed the manager that he would be taking the entire week off. The firmness in his voice left little room for discussion. The manager let out a tired sigh. He was clearly troubled by the situation, but knew he had little authority to stop him. As Min-chul reached the doorway, he paused and turned back. His gaze carried a sharp edge. He stated that he would find another solution. If the company would not provide an advance, he would borrow the money elsewhere. With those words, he walked out, leaving behind a room filled with tension. The manager remained speechless for a few moments after the door closed. Min-chul's attitude had caught him completely off guard. Eventually, his silence turned into irritation. Muttering to himself, he complained that Min-chul had become increasingly disrespectful. In his opinion, giving him too much freedom had only encouraged his behavior. The younger man no longer seemed to acknowledge authority or seniority. Yet despite his frustration, the manager knew there was little he could do. Min-chul consistently secured valuable contracts that benefited the company. Losing him would create problems far greater than enduring his difficult personality. What annoyed him most was the contradiction of it all. Min-chul had no money to speak of, yet carried himself with enormous pride. His stubbornness, refusal to bend, and disregard for workplace hierarchy made him exhausting to manage. Still, he remained indispensable. Elsewhere, another conversation unfolded. A cold voice questioned how someone like Min-chul could have acquired such a powerful supporter. The speaker sounded unconcerned and calculating. They decided to wait only a few more days. If the money failed to arrive by then, whatever happened to Haesoo afterward would no longer be their responsibility. The threat hung heavily in the air. Outside, rain continued to fall as Min-chul stood alone. A memory surfaced unexpectedly. He remembered Haesoo making him promise that he would never borrow money from dangerous people again. The recollection struck him harder than he expected. Faced with his current circumstances, her words felt painfully relevant. He wondered what alternatives remained. He had no savings, no support system, and no obvious way forward. Who would lend money to someone like him? People in his position were rarely treated with compassion. The pressure became almost unbearable. Eventually, he laughed quietly to himself. Not because anything was funny, but because the situation felt absurd. It seemed as though every possible path had been blocked. The scene shifted once more. Taeha stood silently in front of a building. His attention remained fixed on it while he considered something deeply. He appeared motionless, yet his thoughts were clearly active. Nearby, Yoon Ari spoke softly. She asked Min-chul if he wanted to stay the night. Her tone carried a familiar ease, as though she assumed he would agree without much thought. Meanwhile, Haesoo was still working late into the evening. The quiet atmosphere was broken when a customer confronted her. The person's voice was cold and critical, demanding to know what would have happened if a child had been hurt because of the mistake. Immediately, Haesoo bowed her head. Her posture was respectful, but the tension in her body was obvious. She apologized again and again, unable to do much else. Each apology carried a mixture of pressure, embarrassment, and exhaustion. The contrast between the different lives unfolding that night became increasingly obvious. While Minchol spent time with Yunari, seemingly detached from his troubles for the moment, Haesoo remained at work, cleaning tables after everyone else had gone. Her movements were automatic from repetition, yet her hands tightened around the cleaning cloth. Frustration continued building inside her. She tried her best to remain calm, but the burden she carried was becoming difficult to hide. Elsewhere, Taeha remained outside in the darkness. His thoughts grew increasingly possessive. He convinced himself that Haesoo was unaware of everything happening around her. Part of him believed that ignorance protected her happiness. Deep down, he remembered wanting to hide the truth entirely so that her affection would remain untouched, so that it would belong only to him. The thought lingered in silence. Jay, meanwhile, addressed the situation more directly. He demanded to know what Taeha truly intended to do. Was he planning to end everything? Or was his goal to completely remove Minchol from Haesoo's life? As Jay continued speaking, his words became increasingly blunt. He described possibilities ranging from destroying Minchol emotionally, so he would never approach her again, to taking personal revenge in a way nobody else could. He also brought up the ongoing payments being sent to Haesoo's former husband, pointing out how deeply tangled the situation had become. His observations exposed just how unstable everything truly was. Neither man offered a solution. The tension remained. Standing before the building, Taeha listened quietly while Jay continued. Jay suggested that things should proceed exactly as they were. Minchol needed to keep believing that the past could still be restored. After all, he had once treated Haesoo's love as something permanent, something that would always remain available to him. Jay argued that people often fail to appreciate what they possess until it disappears. Even a flower that appears crushed can bloom again. He continued by saying that if Haesoo ever left the home where Minchol believed their world once existed, everything he relied on emotionally would collapse. Minjun, unexpectedly proposed marriage to Yunari during a tense private moment. His serious attitude immediately caught her off guard because he had always dismissed the topic whenever she brought it up in the past. Unable to understand the sudden change, she questioned whether he was truly sincere or acting under the influence of some recent event. Rather than backing down, Minjun revealed a difficult truth. He explained that he was carrying an enormous amount of debt and that his financial situation was far worse than most people realized. He emphasized that he was not asking Ari to solve his problems and warned her that rebuilding his life could take years. He even suggested that if she became exhausted by the wait, she should leave and find someone else. Ari refused to accept that response. She stopped him from creating distance between them and insisted on learning the full truth. Once she discovered that part of the financial burden was connected to Haesoo, her feelings became far more complicated. What began as shock quickly developed into resentment. She convinced herself that Haesoo had failed to appreciate Minjun and had contributed to the hardships he now faced. Determined to stand by him, Ari promised that she would help however she could. Although her savings were limited, she insisted that they could gradually overcome the problem together. Minjun accepted her support calmly. Outwardly, he appeared grateful and reassuring, though there was a subtle sense that he understood exactly how the situation had worked in his favor. Encouraged by his response, Ari embraced the future he described and became increasingly convinced that she belonged beside him. Elsewhere, Haesoo attended a job interview. During the conversation, the interviewer asked about her background and reviewed her work history. He noticed that she had worked many different jobs and had not continued her education beyond high school. Haesoo worried that this would make her appear unreliable. Instead, the interviewer interpreted it differently. To him, her record demonstrated persistence and responsibility. Despite difficult circumstances, she had continued working consistently. To her surprise, she was offered the position. Still unsure whether she had heard correctly, Haesoo asked for confirmation. The interviewer reassured her and welcomed her to the team. Grateful and relieved, she accepted the opportunity. As he showed her around the cafe, she noticed the wide variety of food and drinks available. The sight reminded her of periods in her life when she regularly skipped meals to save money. Her thoughts naturally turned to Taeha. She remembered how often he had taken care of her without expecting anything in return. Reflecting on everything he had done, she found herself wanting to do something thoughtful for him as well. The idea brought a small smile to her face. Meanwhile, Ari was dealing with her own frustrations. After reviewing her finances, she realized that her savings would not be enough to erase Minjun's debt. She had spent much of her money on personal expenses and daily comforts. The more she thought about the situation, the more irritated she became. Her resentment toward Haesoo continued to grow, fueled by the belief that Minjun was suffering because of problems connected to her. Convinced that only she truly understood his struggles, Ari became increasingly possessive and protective. Later, Haesoo found herself waiting outside while thinking about Taeha. Knowing that his workplace was nearby, she debated whether she should contact him. She had already sent a message, but 15 minutes had passed without any response. Seeing that the message remained unread made her wonder whether he was simply busy or avoiding his phone entirely. She repeatedly reminded herself not to overreact. Even so, she could not stop checking her screen. She considered sending another message or making a call, but worried that doing so might seem overly clingy. At the same time, the excitement she felt about their future together continued to grow. She even questioned whether she was becoming more emotionally invested than he was. While looking at her phone once again, she noticed Taeha's contact information, which she had marked with a small heart. The sight embarrassed her slightly, as though it exposed feelings she normally kept hidden. What she did not realize was that Taeha was already nearby. Watching quietly, he noticed both the contact name and the heart symbol. A faint smile appeared on his face. Approaching her, he gently brushed a strand of hair away from her face. The gesture immediately drew her attention. When their eyes met, the atmosphere softened. Taeha casually asked whether she was waiting for someone. Embarrassed, Haesoo quickly tried to hide her phone. She nervously asked whether he had seen anything, but he playfully pretended not to know what she meant. His teasing only deepened her embarrassment. Despite the awkwardness, both of them found comfort in the moment. Their exchange was simple, yet it carried a warmth that neither needed to explain. In small interactions like these, they discovered a sense of happiness and belonging that made being together feel natural. Nahu looked at Taeha with a wary, questioning gaze as she asked what he had been doing all day. He answered casually that he had been at work, yet his eyes never quite met hers properly. His tone was relaxed, almost indifferent, as if nothing unusual had happened between them. She immediately sensed the emotional gap. She asked again whether he had stayed at the company the whole time, and he simply confirmed it without offering further detail. When he added that she was likely asking because he hadn't picked up her calls, there was still no trace of guilt in his behavior. Instead, he stepped closer and calmly asked if she was angry. That question only intensified her frustration. In her mind, she questioned why this pattern always repeated itself. How men could be so persistent in the beginning, yet once things stabilized, their attention faded and their attitude shifted so easily. Later, while sitting with colleagues, Hugh silently listened as one of them vented about relationships. The coworker complained that men tend to chase passionately at first, only to become distant after getting what they wanted. She insisted that playing hard to get was the safest approach emotionally, no matter how strong one's feelings were. Before leaving, the coworker mentioned a friend who was crying after a breakup and hurried off to comfort her. Even as she left, she continued criticizing how easily people abandon those they once pursued so intensely. Those words lingered in Jisu's mind, feeling uncomfortably close to her own experience. Her thoughts drifted back to an earlier moment. She remembered giving Taeha the bread she had brought and telling him she only called him to hand it over. He looked at her carefully and asked whether that was really the only reason. He said the bread would go cold if she kept hesitating. She avoided his gaze the entire time, trying to appear calm, though disappointment weighed heavily inside her. Taeha glanced at the bread with mild amusement and asked again if it was truly meant for him. Embarrassed by how obvious her concern had been, she snapped at him to stop talking. Internally, she wondered whether she was too easily swayed by small things. Despite her irritation, she noticed how genuinely happy he seemed over something so simple, which only confused her further. As they walked together afterward, Taeha appeared unusually cheerful, while Haesoo stayed slightly ahead, lost in thought. His unanswered calls still bothered her, especially since he had never properly explained why he ignored them. Even when he noticed the heart on her saved contact and teased her instead of addressing it, he gave no real clarification. A quiet disappointment settled in her chest. By the time they reached her apartment, the tension between them remained unresolved. Taeha mentioned he might finish work late the next day and casually asked if he could stay over. At the entrance, she immediately stopped him and told him to remain outside. She insisted he should go home for the night. Her tone was firm, but uncertainty lingered beneath it. Taeha looked confused and reminded her that they had already agreed to live together after moving. Unable to face him directly, she avoided eye contact and stepped inside, repeating that since they hadn't officially moved in yet, he should return home. Before he could respond, she closed the door. The silence that followed was suffocating. The confidence she had forced into her voice faded instantly. She stood near the door again, her expression turning conflicted and embarrassed. Slowly, she began questioning her own actions. She realized she had pushed him away without meaning it. She wondered whether her reaction had been triggered by his discovery of the heart symbol in his contact name, or whether she had simply been genuinely hurt by his earlier distance. She admitted to herself that she had been waiting for him despite pretending otherwise, unable to send messages or call first, but still wanting to be with him. Instead of expressing that honestly, she had acted cold. She criticized herself for being overly emotional over something as simple as a missed response, even convincing herself that perhaps she was overreacting due to stress. Yet as she stayed near the door, her anger gradually softened into affection. She reflected on how patient Taeha had always been. Even when she pushed him away, he never crossed her boundaries without permission. He had endured her sharp words without forcing anything on her. That realization made her feel guilty. She wondered if he had actually left. The thought pushed her to open the door quickly, but she froze when she saw him still standing there, quietly waiting. He had not gone anywhere. Startled, she awkwardly greeted him. Before she could say more, Taeha stepped forward and pulled her into his arms. The sudden embrace stunned her, and all remaining tension dissolved into silence. He said nothing elaborate, just held her as if answering everything without words. Later, when she asked why he hadn't left, he calmly replied that he had sensed she might regret it and even cry if he disappeared. Haesoo then apologized for earlier missed calls. She explained that she had been on her way to an interview and had turned off her phone, which was why he couldn't reach her. Taeha said he had waited nearby for a long time, worried they might miss each other. Hearing this, she realized how much effort he had quietly put in without complaint. She looked at him with surprise and a mix of relief and guilt. Her emotions slowly softened, and she finally admitted something she had been avoiding, that she became overly emotional when she cared about someone deeply, and even small distances made her feel insecure. She asked him not to leave her, even when she acted distant or said things she didn't mean. Taeha simply promised he would stay, as long as that was what she wanted. His calm reassurance eased her fear. The scene then shifted to McCall, driving alone through the night, lost in thought. Unlike Haesoo's emotional turmoil, he appeared strangely composed, even faintly amused. He recalled a previous conversation with Erin, especially the question about whether another woman was involved in his situation. A faint smile crossed his face as he remembered it. Then his thoughts turned darker. He questioned whether he even had the right to feel wronged anymore, inwardly blaming Haesoo again for everything, even though he was aware, deep down, that his downfall had been partly self-inflicted. Memories pulled him further back. He recalled sitting in a restaurant with Hyang, who handed him an envelope filled with money, joking that he should buy something nice for his wife. The two exchanged light conversation, with Hyang proudly talking about his growing family and expecting another child. McCall laughed and teased him about being overly sentimental, but Hyang responded warmly, saying that real happiness only made sense once you had a family waiting at home. He described coming back exhausted from work and instantly forgetting all hardship when seeing his wife and children. That idea stuck in McCall's mind. He briefly imagined Haesoo waiting for him at home with a soft smile, alongside a small child resembling her. The thought unsettled him in a strange but comforting way. Hyang also brought up an investment opportunity, encouraging him to try it even with a small amount. But McCall admitted he had barely enough money for basic expenses, including rent. Hyang then gently advised him not to live in such harsh conditions forever, also mentioning concerns about Haesoo's health and how cold living spaces could affect her. The memory faded. McCall returned to a moment where he arrived home in a cheerful mood, greeting Haesoo loudly and apologizing for being late after meeting Hyang unexpectedly. He asked if she had eaten, still in a good mood. But the atmosphere inside the house felt wrong. The warmth he carried earlier disappeared as he noticed her silence and strange expression. Confused, he slowly stopped smiling and asked her what was wrong. The tension between them remained unresolved as the moment cut off. The doctor informed Haesoo that she was not pregnant. Her body had been severely overworked, which had temporarily stopped her menstrual cycle. He also explained that, for now, pregnancy would be difficult, although improvement could be possible if her health recovered in the future. After leaving the hospital, Haesoo and Minjun walked home in complete silence. The atmosphere felt heavy until she quietly apologized for not being able to conceive. Minjun was taken aback and asked why she would say something like that. She continued blaming herself, insisting she could not even give him a proper family or stable life. Minjun then admitted something of his own. He said that although he had once promised to protect her because of her fragile condition, he had still pushed her to work. He also confessed that when he initially believed she was pregnant, he had felt fear rather than joy. The idea of becoming a father had overwhelmed him, and he worried he would not be able to handle it. Because of that, when the pregnancy turned out to be false, he felt relieved, but that relief immediately turned into guilt. He told her not to blame herself, saying he was the one who should feel sorry. Trying to ease the tension, he lightly tapped her shoulder and told her sincerely that having her beside him was already enough. Haesoo quietly accepted his words. Later, the two of them went to a shopping mall and stopped in front of a children's clothing store. Minjun looked at the tiny shoes and outfits with a soft smile, commenting on how much smaller and cuter they were compared to what people used to wear when they were younger. He then said that if they ever had a child in the future, especially one who resembled her, he would want to buy things like this. However, after checking the prices, he joked in disbelief that something so small cost more than his own shoes. Haesoo stood silently, staring at the baby items, while Minjun glanced at her with concern, still trying to lighten her mood. He playfully added that he could at least afford small things like this, and if money ever became a problem, he would just walk around without clothes instead. He joked that she might even prefer that, laughing awkwardly to break the tension. Even though his humor was exaggerated, Haesoo understood he was only trying to comfort her. After a while, Minjun's expression turned more serious. Looking directly at her, he admitted that it had been a long time since they had felt this close. Then, hesitantly, he asked if he could truly become a good father one day. It was clear he was unsure and was seeking reassurance from her more than an answer. But before the moment could deepen, he quickly brushed it off and suggested they return home. He then pulled her into an unexpected hug. These memories stayed deeply engraved in Haesoo's mind. She recalled how sincerely he had spoken while imagining a future child who resembled her, and how genuinely happy he had seemed in front of those tiny clothes. Thinking about it made her cry, because she realized he had been hiding his fears behind a calm expression the entire time. To her, Minjun had always looked like someone pretending to be more confident than he really was, clumsy with his emotions but honest at heart. In the end, she realized she had felt the same way. Being together was already enough for both of them. Meanwhile, Minjun kept recalling advice he had once received from Hyun. He had been warned that being overly cautious and honest with money would only keep him trapped in hardship. He was also reminded of Haesoo's fragile health and told that when opportunity appeared, he needed to take bold risks. Eventually, Minjun contacted Hyun again to ask if that opportunity was still available. Later, Hyun sat in shock after receiving a large envelope of money from him, realizing how much Minjun had secretly saved. When Hyun's wife asked about it, he explained that Minjun was hardworking and deserved a chance to improve his life. Hyun then described how, after following earlier investment advice from a team leader, he had once made unexpected profits from a risky opportunity. Because it seemed too good to be true at first, he had only invested a small amount, but later regretted not going all in when others earned much more. Now that a similar opportunity had returned, he wanted to invest seriously. He even admitted borrowing money from different sources, believing he could repay everything once the returns came in and finally move his family to a better life. His wife, however, remained anxious, asking whether everything would truly be safe, given the large sums involved. Hyun tried to reassure her, pointing out that the previous investment had gone smoothly and everyone had been paid back with profit. Confident in that memory, he insisted that everything would work out again. The scene later shifted to Min-chul sitting quietly beside a sleeping Haesoo. Watching her peaceful face, he repeated those same reassuring thoughts to himself, trying to believe everything would eventually be fine. But the situation soon changed drastically at Hyun's workplace. A man suddenly rushed in, shouting in panic that something had gone terribly wrong. The urgency of his voice immediately alarmed everyone. Hyun demanded to know what was happening and where the responsible person was. Before long, angry investors stormed the area, demanding their money back. The situation escalated quickly as accusations were thrown at Hyun, who insisted the person they were looking for was not present. Nobody believed him. The crowd's anger grew uncontrollable. He was soon surrounded, insulted, and physically attacked before being thrown to the ground as they continued demanding answers about their lost money. Afterward, battered and humiliated, Hyun returned home. Inside, he found his wife and children in tears. Fear and despair filled the house. His wife repeatedly asked what they were going to do now and how they would survive. Hyun stood silently, completely crushed as the reality of the collapse set in, replacing all his earlier confidence with fear. The scene then shifted to Min-jun receiving a phone call from Hyun. Sensing something was wrong, Min-jun asked casually if there was an issue, mentioning rumors he had heard. Hyun tried to hide it at first, forcing a weak laugh and claiming everything was fine. He then asked how Min-jun's investments were going. Still unaware of the situation, Min-jun spoke excitedly about potential profits, joking that their money might even double or triple soon. He sounded hopeful about the future. On the other end, Hyun fell silent. Then his tone changed completely. His voice broke as he admitted there was a reason he had called. It became clear he was crying while speaking. Min-jun immediately sensed something was wrong. After a heavy pause, Hyun finally asked if Min-jun had any money left. Hearing that question, Min-jun froze, confused and unaware of the disaster unfolding, just as the moment cut to an end. Mitchell was on a call with Woo Young when he immediately sensed that something was seriously wrong just from the tone of his voice. Woo Young spoke with hesitation and shame, apologizing for reaching out like this again. He explained that his child had suddenly fallen ill and that he urgently needed a large sum of money. After a series of failed investments, he had been buried under debt, losing everything he once had. Every creditor he owed was now pressuring him relentlessly, and even his remaining savings had completely disappeared. Mitchell stayed quiet, unsure how to respond, while Woo Young continued speaking with growing panic. He admitted that no bank would approve another loan for him anymore, but there might still be one place willing to lend money quickly, possibly under his wife's name instead. The moment Mitchell heard this, his expression turned cold with disbelief. He asked sharply if Woo Young was truly serious. Woo Young immediately apologized again, insisting he had no other option left. In the background of the call, Mitchell could hear the faint cries of Woo Young's family, which made the situation feel even heavier. Mitchell rubbed his forehead, overwhelmed, trying to think clearly. After a long, tense silence, he finally gave in and asked where this lender was. Hearing this, Woo Young broke down in relief, sounding as if he had just been pulled out of drowning. Soon after, they went together to meet the moneylender. From the beginning, the place felt cold, oppressive, and unpleasant. The lender spoke bluntly to Mitchell, warning him that he could barely keep up with his own rent and interest payments. If he truly intended to help his friend, he needed to ensure repayment no matter what happened. Mitchell lowered his gaze to the contract placed in front of him. But the moment he saw the borrower's name, his expression shifted completely. The name written there was not his, it was Na. Despite this, the deal moved forward without pause. Once the cash was handed over, Mitchell quietly passed the money to Woo Young. With trembling hands, Woo Young accepted it and thanked him sincerely. He asked Mitchell to pass along his gratitude to Haesoo, saying he would never forget this help during his darkest time and would repay the kindness someday. After saying this, Woo Young turned back one last time before leaving with his family. Mitchell stood still, staring at the contract that bore Haesoo's name, fully aware of the burden that had just been placed on her without her knowing. As Woo Young walked away with the money, Mitchell silently watched his figure disappear into the distance. Something heavy built up inside his chest, and he suddenly called out. Startled, Woo Young turned around. Mitchell forced a small smile and spoke in a lighter tone, commenting that Woo Young's face looked thinner than before. He let out a soft laugh, trying to ease the tension, joking that a grown man looked oddly cheerful just because he managed to borrow money from his younger brother. Then his voice softened. He reminded Woo Young that no matter how much he worked for his wife and child, he still needed to take care of his health. Hearing this, Woo Young's eyes filled with tears again. Mitchell continued gently, telling him that next time they met, he should have earned a lot more money so they could eat well together, maybe oysters and drink soju. He added that he was also looking forward to meeting his daughter. That broke Woo Young completely, and he laughed through tears. For a brief moment, the two of them felt less like desperate men trapped in debt and more like ordinary brothers sharing a normal conversation. Mitchell looked at him quietly afterward, as if there were deeper words he couldn't say out loud. Even though they were not related by blood, Woo Young had always been someone Mitchell felt connected to and grateful for. In a world where happiness never lasted long, These fragile human bonds were sometimes the only reason people kept going. But once Wu Yang finally disappeared from sight, reality returned sharply. Inside the lender's office, everything continued as if nothing emotional had happened. The atmosphere remained cold and mechanical, like a place where ruined lives were processed without hesitation. Every night, someone here lost their home, went bankrupt, or disappeared into deeper debt. In this place, one person's collapse simply became another person's profit. No one reacted, no one cared. Mitchell stood quietly, staring at the worn furniture, feeling the weight of everything settle over him. Nearby, lenders continued counting money and discussing business without emotion, as if human suffering were just routine. Yet even in that suffocating environment, Mitchell could still hear Wu Yang's relieved laughter echoing faintly in his mind. It was brief and fragile, but somehow it made him feel that helping him had not been completely meaningless. Sometimes life pushed people so far that even the correct choice felt unreachable. He stood there, exhausted, thinking about everything that had just happened. In another corner, Wu Yang was urgently telling his wife to pack only essential belongings. Confused, she asked why they had to leave so suddenly. Instead of explaining, he hugged his daughter tightly and promised he would protect them no matter what. Watching this, Mitchell couldn't help but question everything. Was life really harsh enough to force people into betraying those they cared about? Had Wu Yang simply reached a point where survival outweighed pride, loyalty, and shame? He lowered his head, unable to fully resent him. Then an old memory resurfaced. He remembered being a child, hearing someone cry while his grandmother comforted them. She had told him firmly, "Don't cry. If you cry, the world will look down on you." Young Mitchell had tried to hold back his tears, believing those words with all his heart. The memory shifted forward to his grandmother's funeral. People whispered that he was cold-hearted for not crying over his last relative. But Mitchell had stood silently, forcing himself to stay strong in front of her portrait. "I won't cry," he had told himself. He even tried to smile, telling himself he would live well enough that no one could ever look down on him. But now, standing in the present, that lifelong effort to stay strong suddenly felt suffocating. He had spent years burying his pain, never letting it surface. And finally, it all broke. He covered his face as tears began to fall uncontrollably. His body trembled as years of suppressed emotion poured out. He admitted through sobs how hard everything was, calling out to his grandmother as if he were a child again. He had always believed that crying meant weakness, so he endured everything in silence for years. But now, all that pressure collapsed at once. The lonely child inside him could no longer hold it in. Later, he sat alone in his car at night, driving through empty roads. His eyes were hollow as dark thoughts filled his mind. He began questioning everything about his life, even the choices he was making. Love, marriage, and dreams all felt meaningless now. He thought bitterly about how little he had left to lose. Even his sense of dignity felt already destroyed. He convinced himself that nothing mattered anymore, not even if he slowly lost himself piece by piece. But even as he tried to justify it, another part of him resisted quietly, echoing the promise he once made to his grandmother, to live in a way that no one could look down on him. As he drove through the night, those memories flickered between past warmth and present emptiness. In the end, he realized how far he had drifted from that promise. He continued driving alone into the darkness, carrying debt, guilt, loneliness, and exhaustion all at once, while the memory of his grandmother remained the only fragile thing still holding his broken life together. Taeha was once again trapped inside a nightmare he thought he had long escaped. In his dream, he was kneeling on the ground, crying uncontrollably as his body shook and blood stained parts of his face. The pain felt overwhelming, yet he forced himself to stay composed, as if endurance had been drilled into him since childhood. When he lifted his head, a young girl stood crying in front of him. Even as tears streamed down his own face, his expression hardened. He told her to control herself, his voice carrying a cold discipline that felt deeply ingrained in him. He spoke about suppressing every dark emotion within a person, forcing it down no matter how intense it became. According to him, if that inner darkness was ever allowed to surface, death would be preferable to losing control. The dream suffocated him with fear, guilt, and unresolved trauma. Suddenly, Taeha woke up. The nightmare disappeared, but its weight remained on his chest. Beside him, Haesoo slept peacefully, unaware of what he had just experienced. He stared at the ceiling and exhaled slowly, realizing it had been a long time since that dream last returned, and wishing it had never come back at all. As he lay there lost in thought, Haesoo unconsciously moved closer and wrapped her arms around him in her sleep. Taeha looked down at her, slightly startled, as she murmured something unclear. He leaned in but could not make out her words. Instead, he gently placed a hand on her head, watching her face quietly. The moment reminded him of the night he had carried her to bed himself, softening his expression. In a low voice, he told her she should rest properly, or tomorrow would be difficult for her. Even while asleep, Haesoo tightened her grip on his hand. The sudden gesture froze him. He stayed still, staring at her as if unsure how to react to the intensity of her unconscious need for him. When he eventually tried to pull away, she began murmuring again, this time clearly saying Kang Minjun's name. The sound made Taeha's expression change instantly. A quiet sadness passed over him, but he did not react with anger. Instead, he gently stroked her head and told her everything was all right, urging her to sleep peacefully. His voice stayed calm, though his emotions were clearly unsettled beneath the surface. Soon after, Haesoo shifted again in her sleep and clung to him more tightly, softly pleading for him not to leave. Taeha froze completely. Shock flashed across his face as he looked at her. For a moment, the memories and darkness that usually haunted him seemed to fade, replaced by something unfamiliar. Haesoo calling out to him instead of anyone else. Carefully, he pulled her closer into his arms. His expression softened as he patted her head repeatedly, almost as if reassuring both her and himself. Each word of comfort sounded like something more than reassurance. It felt like a promise he was quietly making to himself. He held her as if she might disappear if he let go. For the first time in a long while, his attention shifted away from his inner turmoil and focused entirely on protecting the person in his arms. Elsewhere, Taeha's older brother sat with a woman nearby, but he barely reacted to her presence. She tried speaking to him casually, yet he remained silent, lost in thought while smoking. His expression was heavy, weighed down by memories he could not shake. His mind drifted back to the day Taeha had stormed into a building in a violent rage, demanding that everything be stopped immediately and that the target be left alive. He still remembered Taeha's expression, completely unrestrained, nothing like his usual controlled self. Another memory surfaced, Taeha slamming a man against a wall while demanding answers, the situation tense and chaotic. During that incident, his brother had been on a call, panicking and warning that if things went wrong, the entire responsibility would fall on them. What troubled him most now was that Taeha had gone there alone. No backup, no coordination, no regard for the original plan. The original intention had been either to avoid involvement or to stage a controlled rescue scenario that could influence the chairman's perception. Instead, Taeha had ignored everything and acted purely on instinct. His brother understood something deeper. Taeha likely already knew who was behind the situation, possibly even him, yet he still chose to act alone. That realization unsettled him. It suggested Taeha's connection to Haesoo was no longer simple concern. It had become something far more serious. As he continued thinking, he questioned every possible explanation. It did not seem like recklessness, nor like strategic manipulation. Even the idea that Taeha was hiding a scandal felt too shallow to explain it. Nothing fit properly. What remained was a far more disturbing conclusion. The balance of control in the situation was shifting. It no longer looked like their side was managing events. Instead, it felt like Taeha and Haesoo were becoming the ones who must not be exposed at any cost. Meanwhile, a captured man was being mocked by his captors. They found it strange that he was not panicking or shouting like they expected. Normally, someone in his position would be screaming about influence and connections, but he stayed silent. That silence only made them more suspicious. They laughed and said he might eventually break and reveal something useful. To them, it was entertainment. They also joked that if no one came to rescue him soon, he was finished. They had no idea what kind of situation he had actually been dragged into, or who Haesoo really was connected to. At another location, Taeha's mother examined a large painting in her residence and immediately criticized it, calling it depressing. She ordered it removed and replaced. During this, she received a call from her elder son. She casually asked if he was causing trouble again, but he dismissed the idea, saying he had more important matters. He requested a favor from her involving the director and abruptly instructed her to send that person instead. When she asked who he meant, he clarified he was referring to Taeha and insisted she handle things with the chairman. Her suspicion grew, but before she could question further, he ended the call. On his side, he muttered that being an older brother was exhausting, though his irritation masked concern. Despite everything, he was still trying to clean up Taeha's situation in his own way. Later, Jay stood with Taeha on a bridge after finishing a phone call. The atmosphere was cold and tense. Jay informed him that the additional payment had been transferred. Taeha listened quietly, spinning a lighter in his hand. After a moment, he pointed out how strange it was. When Haesoo had struggled desperately, there had been no money, but now funds suddenly appeared. Jay agreed, calling the people involved disgraceful. Taeha then calmly described the situation with cold clarity. Minjun was exploiting everyone around him, taking money from his younger partner while also maintaining control over his ex-wife's situation. To Taeha, it was a pathetic and shameless cycle. Jay, however, was increasingly unsettled, not by the criminals, but by Taeha himself. He noticed how accurately Taeha had predicted every development, as if he had already mapped out the entire sequence long before it happened. This was no longer simple observation. It felt like premeditated foresight. Jay finally asked how long Taeha had been watching everything so closely. He also tried to offer advice, but Taeha cut him off immediately. The atmosphere changed. Taeha slowly looked at him, his gaze calm but sharp enough to silence him. In a quiet voice, he said that maybe he had been going easy on him until now. The implication behind those words was clear. Under his composed exterior, something far colder and more dangerous was becoming visible. Jay continued pressing Taeha about Minchil, questioning why everything had to be handled in such an unnecessarily roundabout way. He admitted Minchil was a man who deserved punishment for what he had done, yet he still did not understand why Taeha refused to confront him directly. Taeha immediately cut him off and ordered him to drop the subject. But Jay wasn't satisfied. He pointed out that Taeha was already on relatively close terms with Haesoo and began listing the odd decisions he had made. When Jay discovered that Taeha had even arranged a job for Haesoo's ex-husband within the company, he started to feel that Taeha's thinking was far more distorted than he had assumed. Later, when Taeha went as far as helping Min Cheol settle near Yoon Ari's office tel, Jay grew even more confused, unable to grasp the purpose behind it all. His thoughts drifted back to an earlier confrontation when he had bluntly asked Taeha if he had completely lost his mind. At that time, Jay questioned what could realistically be achieved, even if a few people were dealt with, reminding him that many others were still involved in the situation. Taeha, however, had simply told him to step aside because he needed to go see Haesoo. Back in the present, Jay still believed Taeha's approach was irrational and difficult to decipher, yet a part of him still hoped things would somehow resolve themselves. There was something strangely compelling about witnessing such obsessive, all-consuming devotion. Even so, Jay could not understand why Taeha was trying so hard to pull all of these people back into one shared orbit. Was it revenge? Was he trying to show Minchil that the woman he once discarded was now happy with someone superior? Or was he aiming to make him suffer the same pain Haesoo had once endured? To Jay, revenge, like in stories or films, never worked out cleanly in reality. The consequences always returned eventually, and there was no reason to drag someone deliberately down to the very bottom. He also felt it made even less sense for Taeha to carry the burden of someone else's karma. Another concern lingered in his mind. What would happen if Haesoo and Minjun crossed paths again and old emotions resurfaced? He asked Taeha what he intended to do if she wavered. From Jay's perspective, people often claimed the past had no power over them, but that was never true. Memories were powerful. They pulled people back into relationships they already knew would fail. They made people return to those who had hurt them, clinging to a single good memory while ignoring a long history of pain. Even after being wounded, people still held on to the smallest traces of kindness they once received. Because of that, Jay was certain Haesoo would not be able to detach so easily. He tried to make Taeha see this, hoping he would reconsider his plan. But Taeha remained firm. He said that if Haesoo ever hesitated, he would simply make staying with him feel less painful than leaving. In other words, he would become someone she could not walk away from. To Jay, that logic sounded extreme, like someone obsessing over a minor scratch while willingly inflicting a far deeper wound. Still, Taeha showed no uncertainty and confidently insisted that Haesoo already had feelings for him. Jay could only think that human emotions were far too unstable to rely on such certainty. Looking back, he felt there were many things he should have said, but didn't. The scene then shifted to Haesoo starting a new chapter as she arrived at her new workplace. A manager greeted her and introduced her to the staff she would be working with. He explained their shifts, showed her around the cafe, and pointed out the bakery section, counter, and various workstations. Haesoo was slightly overwhelmed by how many people were working there. While she was still adjusting, she was told her tasks would include preparing drinks and taking orders at the counter, and that Ho-young would guide her whenever she needed help. The manager finished the introductions and encouraged everyone to get along well. One of the staff members, Ho-yeon, warmly welcomed her and said she looked forward to working with her. Nervous as the newest employee, Haesoo politely returned the greeting, though she still felt uneasy in the unfamiliar environment. Ho-yeon then gave her a quick tour, showing her where the uniforms were kept and handing her an apron. She searched for the rest of the outfit and eventually found the hat, urging Haesoo to change quickly so she could start learning recipes. Looking at the uniform, Haesoo thought it was quite cute and briefly considered sending a photo of herself in it to Taeha. As they talked, Ho-yeon mentioned that calling her by name felt awkward and asked her age, saying she was 26. Hearing this, Haesoo quietly realized she was older than most people around her. A small worry formed in her mind that she might make others uncomfortable. Feeling self-conscious but wanting to be polite, she answered hesitantly that she was 34 and suggested they could just call her that if needed. However, Ho-yeon immediately dismissed the idea, saying age titles like that felt unnecessary in modern times. She joked that everyone is born the same way and ultimately heads toward the same end, so there was no need to create distance over age. Instead, she chose a friendlier approach on her own and started calling her Annie, only asking for approval after the nickname was already decided. Hyun's easygoing attitude made it hard not to smile. As they worked together, Haesoo quickly adapted. While making a chocolate shake, she surprised Ho-yeon by memorizing the recipe almost instantly. Ho-yeon was stunned. This was one of the most complicated items on the menu. Even though Haesoo modestly said she wasn't particularly smart, Ho-yeon disagreed, pointing out that it had taken her days to learn what Haesoo had grasped in minutes. The more Ho-yeon observed her, the more unusual it seemed. In her experience, their boss usually hired staff based on appearance rather than ability, and training them was often frustrating. Seeing someone competent like Haesoo felt completely out of place. That thought stayed in her mind until her curiosity shifted. After a pause, she finally asked the question she had been holding back, whether Haesoo was currently seeing someone, leaving the moment hanging as the chapter ended. A truant suddenly said there was something she had been wondering about and asked Haesoo whether she was currently in a relationship. The question caught her off guard, and Haesoo hesitated for a brief moment, lowering her gaze before softly admitting that she was seeing someone. Even after answering, she looked slightly away, as if embarrassed that she had revealed it so easily. A truant reacted immediately, surprised by how straightforward her answer had been. Teasing her lightly, she asked if she liked him that much. That question brought a faint smile to Haesoo's face. Almost unconsciously, her thoughts drifted to Taeha, especially his large, warm hands that always gave her a sense of safety. Thinking about him made her feel calm, and she quietly said that he was a good person. Her sincerity was clear in her tone. A truant seemed relieved after hearing this and commented that it was good to know. Confused, Haesoo asked what she meant, but a truant hesitated and struggled to explain. Before she could elaborate, the cafe door opened and a rush of customers came in, interrupting their conversation. Both of them quickly shifted back into work mode, greeting the incoming guests. As they moved to serve them, a truant told Haesoo she would explain later, leaving her even more puzzled about why hearing she had a boyfriend had brought such relief. Elsewhere, Taeha sat alone at his desk, lost in thought. His mind drifted back to Haesoo and the small moments they had shared. He recalled how she had once asked if he liked bread and excitedly told him about the cafe she now worked at, saying they had plenty of good pastries. She had even offered to buy him coffee if he ever came by and told him to call her whenever he was hungry. Remembering this, he realized how naturally she cared for others, always thinking of people before herself. It made him wonder if working in a place full of food would finally help her eat properly, since she often skipped meals without concern. Tapping lightly on his desk, he stared upward and thought this might become a problem. At that moment, his phone vibrated. A message from Haesoo had arrived. When he opened it, he saw a photo of her wearing her new cafe uniform and hat. He stared at it for a few seconds before instinctively looking away, a shy smile forming on his face. The image affected him more than he wanted to admit. Looking back again, he muttered to himself that this really might become a problem. Meanwhile, back at the cafe, Atruan and Haesoo resumed their earlier conversation. Atruan exaggeratedly complained that she felt exhausted and even said her whole body hurt. Taking the chance, Haesoo carefully brought up what had been interrupted earlier and asked what Atruan had wanted to say before the customers arrived. At first, Atruan tried to dodge the question, pretending she had forgotten. But after glancing around to make sure the manager and other staff weren't nearby, she finally gave in. She explained that Haesoo's part-time position had a strange reputation among employees. According to her, it was jokingly called the boss's girlfriend position. She admitted the name sounded ridiculous, but there was a reason behind it. The previous girl in that role had been the boss's girlfriend, and so had the one before her, and the one before that as well. The boss, she explained, tended to hire young, attractive women for customer-facing roles, and before long he would begin dating them. Eventually, when the relationships ended, the working environment would become so uncomfortable that the women would end up quitting on their own. Hearing this, Haesoo felt a quiet disappointment settle in. The boss had always seemed kind and respectable to her, which made the revelation hard to process. As she thought about it, she reflected that age and kindness on the surface didn't necessarily mean someone treated everyone fairly. People could appear gentle to one person while acting completely differently toward others. Atruan continued, saying the most recent woman had been only 21 years old, creating a 15-year age gap, which she found unsettling. She couldn't understand how someone in their 30s would enter such a relationship with someone so young instead of guiding them away from it. Even though the girl insisted it was real love, despite being warned, it had still ended like all the others, and she had left the cafe in tears just a month ago. Because of this history, most staff assumed that every new female hire was another target. Atruan admitted that this was why she had felt relieved upon learning Haesoo already had a boyfriend. More importantly, she said she could tell from the way Haesoo spoke about him that her feelings were genuine. She encouraged her to hold on to that relationship and not be swayed if anything happened with the boss. Since she believed Haesoo's boyfriend was a good person, she hoped she wouldn't end up in the same situation as the others. Trying to ease the mood, Atruan jokingly suggested she bring her boyfriend to the cafe sometime, mentioning the staff discount for friends and family. The comment sounded lighthearted, but Haesoo hesitated. A faint sadness crossed her face for a brief moment before she forced a small smile and agreed that she would bring him someday. Even though her words were simple, something unspoken lingered beneath them. The scene shifted away from the cafe. Elsewhere, a young woman stood in front of a selection of clothes with a clearly dissatisfied expression. She questioned whether anyone truly believed those outfits suited her, suggesting it felt more like they were trying to clear out unwanted stock. Annoyed, she said she would rather choose everything herself instead of relying on suggestions. Her assistant quickly apologized, confused by her unusually sharp mood, and asked what had caused her irritation. Nearby, Rosie and Pinky sat on a couch watching the situation unfold. Rosie let out an awkward laugh and explained that the suggestions kept bringing clothes that looked like something older women would wear, which annoyed her. She casually suggested they should just pick something quickly, or wait to shop later at their destination, since everything felt the same anyway. The conversation between Rosie and Pinky continued as they relaxed. Rosie sighed, saying she already felt exhausted just thinking about the upcoming flight. Despite her complaints, she mentioned there was someone she planned to meet after arriving. Pinky immediately grew curious and asked who it was, but Rosie avoided giving a direct answer, only saying it was probably someone Pinky already knew. That vague response only made things more mysterious, and Pinky was left wondering. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Taeha sat with his phone in hand, thinking only of Haesoo. He had finished work earlier than expected and had already messaged her that he would pick her up from the cafe. Even after sending it, he kept staring at the screen with a faint smile. Ever since receiving her photo in uniform, it had been stuck in his mind, making him more eager to see her. While he was lost in thought, his mother approached him with her assistant. He greeted her respectfully as she asked about his travel preparations and commented on concerns his brother had apparently raised. She mentioned that his brother had worried he might struggle after isolating himself for so long. Although she said she didn't want him to leave either, she added that he should be grateful, since his brother had always been too soft-hearted. Holding his hand, she noted that the trip would last about a month, and there wasn't much left to prepare. But despite her polite words, there was a cold edge beneath them. Looking directly at him, she added that it wouldn't matter much to her even if he didn't return safely, leaving an uncomfortable tension hanging in the air. Haesoo was busy at work when an unexpected bouquet of flowers was delivered to her. The moment she saw them, her thoughts immediately returned to Taeha and the argument they had recently shared. Even though she was surrounded by work and other people, she found it impossible to keep her mind away from him. The flowers somehow became a reminder of everything that had happened between them. She remembered the night after their argument. The words Taeha had spoken during their fight had hurt her more deeply than she wanted to admit. His harsh words had left emotional wounds that remained in her heart even after the argument was over. Yet despite everything he had said, she could also remember the warmth that came afterward. Taeha had stayed close to her instead of allowing the distance between them to grow. With his usual stubbornness, he had held on to her and refused to let the argument completely separate them. His closeness had slowly calmed her. The warmth of his presence had softened some of the pain caused by his earlier words, making her feel safe again. But when Inai remembered the following morning, her expression changed. When she woke up, Taeha was gone. That had never happened before. At first, she tried to convince herself that there had to be a simple explanation. Perhaps he had been busy. Maybe something had suddenly come up and he had needed to leave early. She tried to tell herself not to overthink it, but something about the situation felt wrong. The message Taeha had left behind did not make her feel any better. His words seemed colder than usual, almost distant. Not long afterward, she received another message from him explaining that because of the time difference, he might not be able to see her messages immediately. Inai replied by wishing him a safe journey. After sending the message, however, she continued staring at their conversation. Something was missing. Their conversations usually contained small things that belonged only to them. Little habits and familiar gestures had become part of their relationship without either of them realizing it. This time, those small details were nowhere to be found. He had not even sent the cute puppy picture they always used. For some reason, that tiny detail bothered her more than she expected. Inai hesitated before sending another message. Eventually, she told Taeha that if anything happened, he should let her know. But almost immediately after sending it, she read her own words again and became uncomfortable. It sounded as though she had told him not to contact her unless something serious happened. That was not what she meant. She had not wanted to push him away. She simply did not know what else to say. Taeha and Inai had argued before. Their relationship had never been completely peaceful, and difficult moments were nothing new between them. They had hurt each other with words, become angry, and sometimes needed time before they could return to normal, yet there had always been one thing she could rely on. Taeha always came back. Since the day they had met, Inai had grown accustomed to having him close to her. She had also become used to pretending that she did not notice the wounds he carried inside himself. There were parts of Taeha's past that he rarely showed to others, and although she knew those wounds existed, she often chose not to force him to talk about them. No matter how difficult things became, however, Taeha had never stayed away long enough for his absence to truly hurt her. Even after their worst arguments, he would eventually return with that beautiful smile of his. Somehow, simply seeing him again was enough to make the pain in her heart disappear. Now, for the first time, he was truly far away, and Inai realized that she did not know how to handle it. She could not become accustomed to having Taeha absent from her life. The thought that made her heart sink the most was the length of his journey. He would be gone for an entire month. A whole month. As she quietly looked at the flowers in front of her, Inai wondered whether she could really endure waiting for him that long. Meanwhile, somewhere else, Taehi was speaking calmly with his personal assistant. He asked whether Taeha had already left. The assistant confirmed that he had. Taehi showed no concern. In fact, his reaction suggested that he had expected it. He knew that Taeha would never turn away from an opportunity to make up for the mistakes he had made in the past. But there was no brotherly affection in Taehi's words. There was only bitterness, resentment, hatred. With disturbing calmness, Taehi even expressed the wish that Taeha's plane would crash. He said it almost casually, as if he were talking about something completely ordinary. Then he called his assistant closer. After staring at him for a moment, Taehi asked whether he looked similar enough to his younger brother for people to mistake them for each other. His question was not innocent. Taehi soon revealed what he was planning. He intended to completely destroy Taeha. For that plan to succeed, however, he needed people to believe that he was Taeha. He began studying his own appearance and comparing it with his brother's. Taehi criticized Taeha's face, claiming that his brother naturally looked gloomy and depressing, as though sadness had been permanently written across his features. Then Taeha confidently declared that he looked much better. His assistant did not seem convinced. When the assistant hesitated, Taeha immediately noticed. "What are you thinking?" he demanded. The assistant quickly answered that he was thinking about nothing. Taeha did not continue questioning him. Instead, his thoughts moved toward Haesoo. He wondered how she would react once his plan began. In his eyes, she still did not understand what true fear was. His voice became increasingly unsettling as he spoke about her. He claimed that he had never treated anyone like trash before, but the idea of tormenting a woman who knew nothing about what was coming made him extremely excited. He was already looking forward to seeing her fear. The scene then shifted to Yoon Seo-yeon and her close friend as they walked together through a busy part of the city. During their conversation, Yoon Seo-yeon suddenly asked about Hani. Her friend explained that Hani had remained in the hotel because she disliked walking around and preferred staying inside. Yoon Seo-yeon thought Hani should have joined them, but neither of them continued discussing it for long. Their conversation soon moved to the large exhibition. Yoon Seo-yeon asked whether her friend had attended it and whether she had seen the director arrive with his son. When her friend confirmed that she had, Yoon Seo-yeon immediately became interested. She asked whether her friend had spoken to him. Then she revealed something from her own past. She had once attended the same school as Taeha. Her friend initially assumed she meant high school, but Yoon Seo-yeon quickly corrected her. It had actually been elementary school. They had known each other when they were only 8 years old. Although their time together had been brief, the memory had remained with her. Eventually, Yoon Seo-yeon had transferred to another school, but she had never completely forgotten Taeha. More importantly, the feelings she had developed for him as a child had never completely disappeared. Her friend became curious. What was Taeha like when he was a child? The question caused Yoon Seo-yeon to pause. She began searching through her memories. Someone nearby reacted sarcastically to the story, finding it ridiculous that a person could continue holding on to feelings for someone they had only known briefly many years ago. But Yoon Seo-yeon did not care. She continued remembering. Even as a child, she had believed that Taeha would grow into a remarkable person. However, the man he eventually became had surpassed even her childhood expectations. There was also one thing about him that had completely surprised her. She had never imagined that Taeha would grow up to be the son of Chairman Taeju. When children are young, they rarely understand the importance of wealth, family names, or social status. At that age, Yoon Seo-yeon had simply assumed that all children lived more or less similar lives. She had not understood the difference between Taeha and the world he came from. Yet even as a child, there had been something unusual about him. Yoon Seo-yeon remembered their classroom. She remembered sitting near Taeha and watching the way he behaved. Most boys their age were loud and careless. They ran around, played without thinking, and acted like ordinary children. Taeha was different. He was quiet. He rarely behaved recklessly. There was an unusual maturity in the way he carried himself, almost as though he had been forced to grow up much earlier than everyone else. Even at such a young age, there was a seriousness about him that Yoon Seo-yeon could not explain. She also remembered something else. Taeha often had bruises. At the time, she had noticed them but did not understand where they came from. She was too young to recognize the meaning behind those injuries. Still, one particular memory remained especially clear. One day, Yoon Seo-yeon had been trying to write something in her contact notebook. Her fingers hurt, making it difficult for her to continue. Taeha noticed her struggling. He looked confused at first, but instead of simply watching, he quietly helped her. He took the notebook and wrote in it for her. It was an incredibly small gesture, yet somehow that simple moment had remained in Yoon Seo-yeon's memory for years. The scene returned to the present as her friend reacted with surprise. The idea of Chairman Taeju's son sitting quietly in a classroom and writing in a classmate's notebook seemed almost impossible compared with the man Taeha had become. His current appearance made the memory even more amusing. Today, Taeha looked cold and intimidating. His strong appearance and serious expression could easily make people uncomfortable around him. Yet once, he had simply been a quiet little boy sitting beside a girl and helping her write. To Yoon Seo-yeon's friend, the contrast was surprisingly cute. As the conversation continued, Yoon Seo-yeon began thinking about seeing Taeha again. She wanted to tell him that they had once been classmates. She admitted that she had felt jealous in the past. She had wanted to speak with him but had never found the opportunity because there were always so many people around him. Her friend immediately shut down that hope. She told Yoon Seo-yeon that things would not be any different this time. Taeha would still have someone beside him. The director had personally asked her to remain close to Taeha and guide him during his stay. Considering how important his family was, she was expected to stay near him and make sure everything went smoothly. She then commented on how perfect Taeha looked. Despite traveling such a long distance, not even one strand of his hair seemed to be out of place. The conversation shifted once again. Nearby, someone looked at Taeha and quietly wondered whether everyone born into wealthy families was like him. Another person turned toward Jay and asked why he had followed Taeha all the way there. Jay immediately complained that he wanted to return to Korea. He had already had enough of the situation and clearly wanted to go home. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to Yoon-ari. She stood quietly, adjusting her dress when the voices of several female colleagues reached her. At first, she did not pay much attention, but after listening for a little longer, she realized that they were talking about her relationship with Min Chae-ul. One of the women asked how long Ari and Min Chae-ul had been together. She recalled that they had practically been a couple since the moment he joined the company. According to her, Min Chae-ul had immediately started dating the youngest and prettiest female employee. She thought the relationship suited him perfectly. Another woman, who was newer to the company, hesitated before admitting that she was not sure whether Ari was actually that beautiful. The others laughed and continued discussing her. One woman defended Ari's appearance, but then shifted the conversation toward her age. She began speaking as though youth were the most valuable quality a woman could possess. She argued that men always preferred younger women and behaved as though they could not live without them. However, she continued, being young might be useful for temporary relationships, but it was not necessarily what a man needed when he was ready for marriage. According to her, a younger woman could provide comfort during lonely moments, but a mature woman would make a much better life partner. She then brought up Min Chae-ul's age. Since he was already 34, she suggested that someone closer to his own age would suit him better. Ari heard every word. She remained silent. She did not interrupt them. She did not reveal how much their comments were hurting her. But inside, their words were cutting deeper and deeper. It was painful enough to hear strangers discussing her appearance and age. What hurt even more was hearing them casually speak about her relationship, as if it were already destined to end. They were judging her life without knowing anything about it. Then one of the women made the final comment. From the way things looked, she said, Ari and Min Chae-ul would probably break up soon anyway. That was the moment Ari could no longer remain silent. The sadness she had been holding inside suddenly turned into anger. She stepped out of the washroom and confronted the women directly. She demanded to know whether they had completely lost their minds and whether they were finally finished talking. The atmosphere changed instantly. What had begun as casual gossip became a tense confrontation. Ari had finally allowed the pain she had been hiding to show itself. At the same time, Min Chae-ul was still sitting at his desk. One of the male employees suddenly called his name urgently. Min Chae-ul looked up, confused by the sudden interruption. At first, he assumed the man wanted to discuss something related to work. Since it was already lunchtime, Min Chae-ul calmly suggested that they could talk about it later. But the employee immediately explained that it was not about work. Something serious had happened. He urged Min Chae-ul to come with him as quickly as possible. The change in the man's voice made Min Chae-ul realize that this was not an ordinary matter. His calm expression disappeared, replaced by confusion and concern. Before he could discover what had happened or receive any further explanation, the scene came to an end. The reason behind the urgent call remained unknown. Whatever had happened was serious enough to interrupt everything, and Min Chae-ul was now being pulled directly into a situation he had not expected. The chapter ended there, leaving the consequences of the events still hanging in the air. Yoon-ari's patience finally reached its limit. The moment she heard the other woman speaking about Min-chan, all the emotions she had been trying to suppress suddenly burst out. She stepped forward without hesitation, her anger impossible to hide, and demanded to know why the woman was talking about her boyfriend in such a disrespectful way. She could not understand how someone could speak so casually about another person's relationship, especially when that person was already aware that Min-chan and Ari were together. To Ari, the situation was not harmless gossip anymore. It felt like someone was deliberately crossing a line. Her voice became sharper as the argument continued. She accused the woman of behaving as though she had the right to flirt with someone else's boyfriend and questioned what kind of person would knowingly interfere in another couple's relationship. The other woman was caught completely off guard by Ari's sudden confrontation. She demanded that Ari let go of her and called her crazy, but Ari refused to back down. She had heard enough. Ari firmly defended her relationship with Min-chan, making it clear that they were not simply dating casually. They were planning to get married. To her, that meant their relationship was serious, and anyone attempting to come between them was crossing a much more important boundary. In the middle of the argument, however, Ari suddenly heard someone call her name. She immediately turned around. Standing there was Minchan. The anger on her face disappeared almost instantly. The moment she saw him, her expression changed, and she called out to him as though his presence had suddenly given her somewhere safe to turn. Later, outside the washroom, the situation was completely different. Ari could no longer control her emotions. She stood beside Minchan, while tears continued running down her face. She tried to stop herself, but the more she thought about everything that had been said, the harder it became. Minchan told her to stop crying, yet his words did little to calm her. Through her tears, Ari began explaining what had happened. She complained about the woman who had been talking about them and repeated the things she had said. Everyone at work already knew that Ari and Minchan were together, yet that woman had still spoken, as though their relationship meant nothing. What hurt Ari most was the prediction that she and Minchan would eventually break up. She also could not forget the comments about her appearance. Those words had stayed in her mind. Minchan tried to dismiss the whole situation. He could not understand why Ari cared so much about the opinion of someone whose words meant nothing to him. But Ari's tears were not really about that woman. The argument had only brought a much deeper fear to the surface. She was afraid. She was afraid that one day Minchan might meet another woman who would attract his attention. She worried that if another woman became interested in him, he might eventually become interested in her as well. Ari had been paying attention to even the smallest details. She remembered the coffee that one of his female co-workers had given him. To someone else, it might have been completely meaningless. To Ari, however, it had become another reason to worry. She brought it up while crying, making it clear that she had noticed it and had been thinking about it ever since. Minchal reacted impatiently. He immediately dismissed the idea that the coffee meant anything. In his mind, the woman who had given it to him was completely irrelevant. He compared her to Haesoo and knew that she could never mean anything to him because she was not Haesoo. He explained that he had only accepted the coffee because it had been offered to him. There had been no hidden meaning behind it. Ari, however, did not feel that he was understanding her. She told him that she would not have become so upset if he had simply recognized her feelings from the beginning. She did not necessarily need him to agree that the other woman was a threat. She wanted him to understand why the situation had hurt her. Minchol became increasingly frustrated. In his mind, constantly dealing with Ari's worries and repeatedly comforting her was becoming exhausting. He could not understand why such a small matter had turned into such a serious emotional problem. Yet while he was thinking about how tiring the situation had become, his thoughts unexpectedly moved toward Haesoo. He remembered seeing her cry. At first, he tried to convince himself that even if Haesoo behaved like Ari, constantly complaining and becoming emotional, he would probably grow tired of it too. But as he continued thinking, his conclusion slowly changed. Haesoo was different. Somewhere inside his mind, he began imagining her behaving in the same way. And strangely enough, the thought did not annoy him as much. Instead, he found himself thinking that even if Haesoo complained, she might somehow look cute while doing it. The comparison immediately separated her from Ari and his thoughts. Before Minchol could continue thinking about it, Ari suddenly grabbed onto him again. She called his name, bringing his attention back to her. He looked at her and asked what she wanted now. Ari hesitated. The anger and sadness on her face were slowly being replaced by nervousness. Then she asked a question that revealed what had really been troubling her. What would happen in the future? Could Minchol ever betray her? She reminded him that their relationship was supposed to lead to marriage. She had even lent him money because they were planning their future together. Her words were no longer about the argument at work. They were about the fear of losing him. Ari held onto him tightly as everything she had been keeping inside finally came out. She asked what she was supposed to do if he eventually started looking at another woman. What if he contacted that woman again? And then she mentioned Haesoo. Even saying her name seemed to make Ari more anxious. The fear in her voice showed that this was not something that had started that day. The argument had simply awakened an insecurity that had been sitting inside her for a long time. Minchol looked at her and tried to reassure her. He told her that he would not betray her. Then he asked whether she really trusted him so little. Ari wanted to believe him, but there was still something she needed to know. There was a question that had remained unanswered for too long. She pointed out that Minchol had never properly explained why he had divorced Haesoo. Until now, she had tried to avoid asking too many questions. But if she was going to marry him, she felt that she had the right to understand what had happened in his previous marriage. She asked him directly, why had he divorced her? Minchul initially tried to avoid the subject. He told Ari that it belonged to the past and questioned why there was any reason to bring it up again. But Ari refused to let the matter disappear. She explained that knowing the truth would help her understand their relationship better. If she knew what had gone wrong before, perhaps she could make sure that she did not repeat the same mistakes. Minchul's response was colder than she expected. He told her that this was not something that could simply be fixed by trying harder. Ari did not understand. She gave a confused laugh, almost as though she could not believe what she was hearing. What did he mean? Why was he speaking as if the problem had been something impossible to change? Minchul finally decided to answer. But instead of giving her the gentle explanation she might have expected, he spoke bluntly. He told Ari that Haesoo had been physically unable to have children because of a medical condition. According to him, she would never be able to have children. He gave the explanation without softening his words, then angrily asked whether Ari was finally satisfied now that she had received an answer. Ari immediately fell silent. The revelation left her completely stunned. For several moments, she could do nothing but stare at him. She had expected an explanation, but she had not expected something like this. As she stood there processing his words, a quiet thought formed in her mind. Had that really been the truth all along? Meanwhile, far away from the emotional confrontation, Taeha was busy attending an overseas event. The moment he entered the lobby, he was surrounded by people. He barely had time to stop before another person approached him for an introduction. He moved from one greeting to the next, maintaining the formal smile expected of someone in his position. From a distance, Jay watched everything. The longer he observed Taeha, the more exhausting his life appeared. Taeha had to remember countless faces, exchange greetings with one person after another, and maintain the same polite expression throughout the event. Jay could not imagine living that way. Even if someone offered him money to live such a life, he felt certain that he would never be able to do it. He watched Taeha continue greeting guests and wondered how he could possibly remember everyone. There seemed to be no end to the introductions. Jay even began wondering whether Taeha's mouth would eventually hurt from smiling so much. While he was lost in his thoughts, someone suddenly called his name. Jay immediately responded. He was told that they would be leaving once the current schedule was finished. Thinking the day was finally coming to an end, Jay asked whether this was the final event. Unfortunately for him, the answer was no. He was informed that someone who would be accompanying the young master beginning the next day wanted to meet him beforehand. The person apparently wanted to introduce himself before officially starting his duties. Jay was surprised. This was the first time he had heard about it. He immediately explained that no one had told him anything about such a meeting. His first instinct was to inform Taeha and wait for further instructions. However, he was quickly told that there was no need to ask. The director had already given permission. The matter had already been arranged. As the event continued, the atmosphere remained lively. Several women nearby began whispering while looking toward Taeha. His appearance naturally drew attention, and people could not help noticing him, even when he was simply standing among the other guests. Jay, however, was more interested in the mysterious person they were supposed to meet. He could not stop wondering who it was. Being called somewhere like this in the middle of the night did not seem like something ordinary. The people who normally surrounded Taeha were not the type to arrange strange meetings without a reason. The more Jay thought about it, the more suspicious he became. Finally, after hesitating, he asked Taeha whether the person they were meeting might be a woman. Before Taeha could provide much of a reaction, someone else entered the scene. Taeha unexpectedly came face to face with Rosie. Rosie approached him naturally without any hesitation. She immediately complained that she had expected him not to come at all because he had ignored her calls. She studied his expression and quickly realized that he was not happy to see her. Rather than being discouraged, she jokingly pointed it out. She told him that he was making his dislike of her far too obvious and complained that his reaction hurt her feelings. Then she casually mentioned something that made the situation even more interesting. Starting the following day, they would apparently be seeing each other quite often. Because of that, Rosie suggested that they stop acting so formal around each other. She spoke comfortably, almost as though the two of them were already familiar. Taeha, however, remained quiet. He did not appear particularly interested in responding to her teasing. At that exact moment, someone working for Taeha secretly took a photograph of Taeha and Rosie together. The photograph was later sent directly to Taeha. When Taeha saw the picture, he did not look pleased. Instead, irritation immediately appeared on his face. He stared at the photograph and complained that it barely deserved to be called a proper picture. What annoyed him most was the distance between Taeha and Rosie. He sarcastically wondered whether there was something wrong with Taeha that prevented him from standing closer to women. Taeha had expected something more useful. After Taeha had traveled all that way, Taehi believed he should at least have had some fun with someone new. But the photograph had given him nothing. Disappointed, Taehi concluded that there was no point waiting. If Taeha was not going to cooperate with his expectations, then Taehi would simply have to take matters into his own hands. Later, Taehi met with a woman as he continued carrying out his own plans. The woman pointed out that he had already spent time with her earlier and questioned why he wanted to continue. Taehi calmly explained that he only needed one more thing. He wanted to take a photograph. The woman was confused. She asked why he needed a picture. Taehi simply answered that he intended to show it to someone. Naturally, she wanted to know who. His answer surprised her. He said that he planned to show it to his younger brother's girlfriend. The woman laughed in surprise. She jokingly asked whether Taehi was interested in that kind of thing. Taehi immediately questioned what she meant. He did not seem to understand why she had interpreted his words that way. The woman continued teasing him, laughing as she suggested that there was no way his tastes could really be as innocent as he was making them sound. The strange conversation continued for a short while before the story moved somewhere else. At the cafe, Haesoo was spending time with her co-workers. Unlike the tension surrounding Taehi, the atmosphere here was much more relaxed. Everyone was casually talking and enjoying their time together. Eventually, the conversation turned toward Taeha. One of the female co-workers became curious and asked Haesoo about his height. When she learned that he was more than 190 centimeters tall, she reacted with genuine surprise. Another co-worker immediately agreed. It was difficult for them to imagine someone being that tall. Even one of the male employees joined the conversation and jokingly complained that if Taeha really was over 190 centimeters tall, then he must be almost an entire head taller than him. He admitted that he felt jealous. The others laughed and continued discussing Taeha's unusual height. One woman commented that she could barely remember seeing anyone that tall around them. Haesoo listened quietly. Inside, she admitted that Taeha really was huge. She had not seen many people who could compare to him either. Still, she casually agreed with her co-workers while they continued asking questions about the couple. Soon, their teasing became more personal. They began focusing on the obvious difference in height between Haesoo and Taeha. One of them excitedly asked whether the difference made her heart beat faster. Another jokingly wondered whether her neck ever hurt from constantly having to look up at him. Haesoo became shy. She admitted that it happened sometimes. The others laughed. Someone pointed out that a man as tall as Taeha would probably look intimidating simply because of how large the difference was between them. Haesoo hesitated. Then she quietly disagreed. Taeha was not intimidating at all. Despite his size, she explained, he was actually incredibly cute. The words came out naturally. There was no hesitation in her voice. Her expression softened as she spoke about him, making it obvious that she genuinely meant what she was saying. Her co-workers immediately noticed. They began teasing her even more. Someone laughed and said that Haesoo had clearly become completely blinded by love. Another joked that her description sounded almost impossible to believe. Haesoo smiled awkwardly, but then she suddenly thought about something she had never really considered before. She remembered the way Taeha always lowered himself whenever they were standing together. Because of their height difference, he would naturally bend his head or lower his body so that their eyes could meet. He never complained about it. He simply did it. It was such a small gesture that Haesoo had never questioned it. But now, thinking about it again, she realized how meaningful it actually was. He did not have to lower himself. He chose to. That realization quietly warmed her heart. For a moment, she remained lost in the memory. Then her phone suddenly vibrated. Haesoo immediately looked toward it. Her first thought was Taeha, but she quickly became confused. It should already have been late enough for him to be asleep. Why would he be contacting her now? She reached for her phone and checked the screen. The moment she saw what was displayed, everything changed. The warmth disappeared from her expression. Her eyes widened in shock. She stared at the screen without moving, completely caught off guard by what she had just seen. Whatever the message contained, it was enough to erase the smile from her face instantly. And with that unexpected revelation, the chapter came to an abrupt end. Haesoo remained completely motionless as she stared at the phone in her hand. She could hardly process what she was seeing. The shock was so sudden and overwhelming that her fingers began trembling. Before she could even realize what she was doing, the phone slipped from her hand and struck the floor. The sound echoed around her, yet Haesoo did not react. She simply stood there. Her eyes remained fixed on the phone as though her entire mind had stopped functioning. The photograph displayed on the screen showed Taeha standing beside another woman. But because Taeha and Taeha were identical twin brothers, Haesoo immediately believed that the man in the photograph was Taeha. That single misunderstanding was enough to break her heart. The person she trusted and loved more than anyone suddenly appeared to be standing closely beside another woman. She did not have time to think rationally or question what she was seeing. The pain reached her first. Her breathing became heavier. A familiar feeling of despair slowly spread through her chest. It reminded her of another painful period in her life, the end of her marriage to Min-jun. That experience had left wounds that she had spent years trying to bury. She had believed she had finally managed to move beyond that sadness, yet the photograph suddenly brought all of those old emotions rushing back. For a moment, it felt as though she were experiencing the same heartbreak all over again. Haesoo desperately tried to find another explanation. Maybe she had looked at the photograph too quickly. Maybe the man in the picture was not Taeha. Perhaps it was simply someone who looked exactly like him. But every explanation created another question. If it was not Taeha, then who was the man? And why had someone sent her the photograph? Those questions continued racing through her mind, but none of them made her feel better. Instead, they only made her more nervous. Part of her wanted desperately to know the truth. Another part of her was terrified of discovering it. She slowly bent down and picked up her phone. Perhaps if she looked at the picture carefully, she would realize that she had misunderstood everything. But the moment the phone was back in her hand, fear took control of her again. What if she looked at it and discovered that her first conclusion had been correct? What if the man really was Taeha? What if the person she loved had actually betrayed her? She could not bring herself to find out. Her heart had already accepted the worst possibility, and that made looking at the photograph again almost unbearable. Lost in her thoughts, Haesoo became completely unaware of what was happening around her. One of her coworkers called her name. There was no response. The woman called again. Still nothing. Only after calling her several times did the coworker realize that something was wrong. She noticed the phone lying on the floor and assumed that Haesoo had accidentally dropped it. Since the phone was brand new, she immediately worried that it might have been damaged. She bent down to pick it up. Haesoo reacted instantly. She stopped her before she could see the screen. Trying desperately to hide everything she was feeling, Haesoo assured her that nothing was wrong. She managed to keep the photograph hidden. But she could not hide the pain in her eyes. The image had already taken root in her mind. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to Taeha and Jae, who were standing together in the corridor of the large event hall. Jae knew that Taeha had been worried about Haesoo ever since leaving her behind. Because of that, he decided to give him an update about everything that had happened in her life. He wanted Taeha to know that she was doing well. Jae explained that Haesoo had settled into her new routine without experiencing any major problems. She continued going to work every day and had managed to adapt to her new environment surprisingly quickly. There had also been no serious problems with customers. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. Jae intentionally included even the smallest details because he knew Taeha would want to hear them. Then, perhaps trying to make the conversation a little lighter, Jae casually mentioned that there were also quite a few male employees at her workplace. Taeha immediately reacted. He jokingly asked Jae whether he wanted to work there himself. Jae quickly realized that the joke had not achieved quite the reaction he had hoped for. He laughed and explained that he was only teasing him. Taeha had looked unusually serious since the morning, and Jae had simply wanted to make him smile. He then changed the subject and returned to more practical matters. All the preparations for the move had already been completed. Jae had also introduced himself as the young master's friend, making sure that everything had been properly arranged. There was nothing else Taeha needed to worry about. Taeha acknowledged what he said, but his expression did not change. His attention soon moved toward his phone. Despite Jae's reassurance, one thing continued bothering him. Haesoo had not contacted him. Jae had told him that she was safe and adapting well, yet the silence from her still troubled him. Instead of making him feel relieved, it made Taeha wonder whether she no longer needed him. Perhaps all of the problems that had once made her rely on him had disappeared. Perhaps she was doing perfectly well without him. The thought made him uncomfortable. Jae watched him carefully and realized that none of his reassurance had actually managed to remove Taeha's worries. He understood why. Taeha had left behind the person he cared about and protected more than anyone else. Being on the other side of the world made it impossible for him to know what was happening to her. Then Jae remembered something else. There was a person Director Baek had assigned to stay close to Haesoo. Yet Haesoo had never mentioned meeting that person. The lack of information suddenly made Jae uneasy. His thoughts returned to an earlier encounter. He remembered two women crossing paths nearby. One of them immediately recognized the other and called out to her in an aggressive tone. The woman's personal assistant quickly intervened, asking her to control her language. The conversation soon became hostile. Sharp words were exchanged and insults followed. Taeha, however, did not take the confrontation seriously. Rather than becoming angry, he responded with light sarcasm. Jae had found the woman's aggressive attitude extremely irritating. Even after the encounter ended, the memory remained in his mind. He remembered how one of the women had eventually refused to continue with the others. She insisted that she was not going anywhere and told the others that they could leave without her. The people around her tried to calm her down. They encouraged her not to make such a big issue out of the situation and suggested that everyone simply leave together. But she refused. As Jae recalled the incident, Taeha suddenly asked when Jae had first learned who the woman actually was. Jae answered that he had discovered her identity on the very day they met. Before that moment, he had no reason to know anything about someone from such a powerful chaebol family. He had genuinely not known who she was. Only after asking about her did Taeha explain the truth. She was the only daughter of Chairman Yoon Moo-jin. The moment Jae heard the name, his understanding of the entire situation changed. He repeated the name to himself, finally understanding why people behaved so differently around her. Her family background explained the attention and respect she received wherever she went. Even after learning the truth, however, Jae could only sigh. More than anything, he wanted to return to Korea. He wanted to leave all of these complicated situations behind. Back inside the hall, Chairman Yoon Moo-jin's daughter was becoming increasingly frustrated. Taeha continued to ignore her. She could not understand why he seemed so uninterested in her. Normally, someone in her position would have no trouble attracting attention. Yet Taeha seemed almost completely unaffected by her presence. Instead of discouraging her, his indifference only made her more determined. She wanted to get closer to him. At one point, she even called out to Jae while he was standing nearby. Another woman openly criticized her. She suggested that the young woman was probably already seeing someone and exaggerated the situation by claiming that she likely had several admirers. The comments were made directly in front of her, but she refused to let them damage her confidence. Her companion treated her stubbornness almost like a child's behavior, finding her persistence strangely amusing. Everyone around her assumed that someone with her status would naturally have plenty of people interested in her, but none of that mattered to her. Her attention remained fixed on Taeha. She wanted him. And rather than accepting that he might not be interested, she began comparing herself with Haesoo. She silently questioned what Haesoo could possibly have that she did not. Why would Taeha choose her instead? The questions only made her more determined. Elsewhere, the story moved to a quiet hospital room. Taeha's mother stood beside the bed of an unidentified patient. The atmosphere was completely different from the busy event hall. There was silence in the room, but the woman's thoughts were filled with the past. She carried years of regret. Decades had passed without her receiving forgiveness for the mistakes she had made. Those memories continued to weigh heavily on her. As she looked toward the mysterious patient, she made a quiet decision. She would not allow the tragedy of the past to happen again. This time she intended to do everything she could to prevent history from repeating itself. She wanted to protect her son, Taeha, but she also wanted to protect herself from experiencing the same pain again. The identity of the person lying in the hospital bed remained unknown. For now, the mystery surrounding him was left unanswered. The scene then returned to Haesoo. By the time she finally reached home, she was exhausted. She stepped out of the shower, but even after washing away the exhaustion of the day, she could not free her mind from the photograph. She could barely remember what had happened after seeing it. The rest of her day had become a blur. She did not remember how many mistakes she had made at work. She could not remember exactly how she had managed to finish her shift. She barely even remembered the journey home. Her thoughts had been completely consumed by the image. At one point, she had wandered through the wet streets without paying attention to where she was going. Her shoes were worn out and she slipped several times, but she did not care. She barely noticed. Nothing around her seemed important anymore. There was only the photograph. Even after returning home, Haesoo still could not bring herself to look at it again. She wanted answers. More than anything, she wanted to know whether she had misunderstood what she saw. But every time she considered opening the photograph, Fear stopped her. Instead, she replayed the image inside her mind. Again and again. The face of the man standing beside the woman appeared in her thoughts. She had only looked at the picture for a brief moment, yet it felt as though she had seen it hundreds of times. Maybe thousands. She desperately searched for a reason to believe that the man was not Taeha. She tried to convince herself that there had to be another explanation. The man could have been his identical twin. Someone could have deliberately sent her the picture to create a misunderstanding. Perhaps there was something about the photograph she had failed to notice. She wanted to believe that Taeha could never betray her. But the harder she tried to reassure herself, the more confused she became. Her heart was caught between trust and fear. She wanted to trust the man she loved, but the photograph had planted a terrible doubt inside her. Eventually, her attention moved toward something sitting nearby, the teddy bear Taeha had once given her. She looked at it quietly. The simple gift immediately brought back memories of him. It reminded her of the time they had spent together and all the small things he had done to earn her trust. She remembered how patient he had been with her. After everything she had suffered because of her failed marriage to Minjun, she had been afraid to open her heart again. She had learned to protect herself. She had become accustomed to keeping her emotions at a distance. But Taeha had never forced his way into her life. Instead, he patiently encouraged her to stop running away from her own feelings. He told her that things would eventually become better. He had asked her sincerely not to push him away. More importantly, he had admitted that loving her was something completely new to him. His feelings for her were not something he treated casually. He considered them precious. He had promised her that what he felt was genuine. Those memories were what made the photograph hurt so much. The Taeha she knew was kind, patient, and sincere. The man she believed she had seen in that photograph seemed completely different. The contrast between those two images created an unbearable conflict inside her. Which one was real? Could the man who had treated her so gently really betray her? Could all of the trust they had built together be destroyed by a single photograph? Now Haesoo had no answers. She could only sit alone with her thoughts. She held the teddy bear tightly as memories of Taeha continued to return. Every happy moment they had shared now carried a painful shadow. The more she remembered how much he meant to her, the more frightened she became of losing him. She wanted to believe in him. She wanted to believe that their love was stronger than whatever she had seen. But until she knew the truth, she could not silence the doubt. The photograph continued haunting her, and the longer she remained alone with her thoughts, the heavier the sadness became. Now Haesoo lowered her head, holding onto the teddy bear as though it could somehow protect her from the uncertainty surrounding her. She had no explanation. Haesoo remained frozen in front of her phone, staring at the photograph as though looking away might somehow make it disappear. She had been looking at the same image for what felt like forever, yet she still could not accept what she was seeing. The picture was unclear. It was dark, slightly blurred, and obviously taken in a hurry. The figure in it could not be identified with complete certainty, but to Haesoo, the uncertainty was almost meaningless. The man looked like Taeha. That was enough to make her heart ache. She desperately wanted to believe that her eyes were deceiving her. She wanted to tell herself that the photograph was simply too poor in quality to identify the person correctly. There had to be another explanation. After all, she knew Taeha better than anyone. She had spent countless nights in his arms, crying until she could barely catch her breath. She remembered the way she had clung to him during those moments, holding him so tightly that her fingers had gone pale from the pressure. She knew his face, his posture, his movements, and even the smallest details about the way he carried himself. Those memories were not something she could simply erase. Haesoo slowly reached for the teddy bear Taeha had once given her and pulled it against her chest. Her eyes began to fill with tears. No, that isn't Taeha. She repeated the words silently at first, then again, and again. She wanted repetition to turn the lie into a truth. She wanted her heart to believe what her mind was desperately trying to convince it of. But doubt remained. If the man in the photograph really was not Taeha, then who was he? And why had someone sent the picture to her? That question suddenly changed the way she looked at the entire situation. Perhaps the photograph had never been intended to make her jealous. Maybe she was looking at something much more dangerous. Taeha had enemies. His family had complicated problems, and she already knew that people connected to those problems had targeted him before. She remembered the time he had been chased and the danger surrounding him. What if those people had returned? What if someone was watching him from the shadows? The thought made her chest tighten. If the message had been sent directly to threaten her, Haesoo believed she could have ignored it. She had already survived enough painful experiences in her life. She had learned how to endure intimidation and pressure without immediately breaking. But this was different. Taeha was involved. The moment she thought he might be in danger, she could no longer pretend that she had not seen the photograph. Even if she wanted to throw the phone away and forget everything, she knew she could not. Her fear for him was stronger than her desire to protect herself from the truth. Elsewhere, Taeha had just finished swimming. He climbed out of the pool and looked completely dissatisfied. Instead of being impressed by the result of his plan, he appeared almost bored. He had expected Haesoo to react much more strongly. In his mind, Taeha was on the other side of the world. Surely that should have been enough to make Haesoo panic. He imagined her desperately trying to contact him, worrying about where he was, or perhaps even attempting to find a way to protect him. Yet none of that had happened. Haesoo had not reacted the way he wanted. That irritated him. He turned toward his assistant and casually brought up something he had heard about her. Apparently, Haesoo worked several part-time jobs. Taeha sarcastically suggested that perhaps she was simply too busy working to notice what was happening around her. His comments quickly became crueler. He wondered whether she actually enjoyed watching her relationship collapse instead of doing anything to save it. He mocked her personality, calling her boring and painfully uninteresting. But the real reason for his frustration was obvious. She was refusing to give him what he wanted. A reaction. Taeha wanted to see her panic. He wanted to see her cry. He wanted her to lose control. Instead, Haesoo had remained far more composed than he expected. That failure made him lose interest. With complete arrogance, he declared that someone as boring as Haesoo would probably have been abandoned by her boyfriend within a month anyway. His words revealed exactly what kind of person he was. He did not care about the pain he caused. To him, other people's emotions were nothing more than entertainment. Then, a notification suddenly broke the silence around the pool. Taeha turned toward the table where he had left his phone. His expression immediately became irritated. He walked over, picked up the phone, and glanced at the screen. "Who's messaging me at this hour?" he muttered to himself. As usual, his arrogance quickly returned. He joked that if the message turned out to be from a man rather than a woman, he would kill him. Then he unlocked the screen. His expression changed. The message was from Haesoo. She demanded to know who he was. She told him to stop sending strange messages and playing meaningless games with her. She questioned what exactly he wanted from her and made it clear that she had grown tired of his harassment. Taeha stared at the screen. For several seconds, he said nothing. It seemed as though he could not understand what he was reading. Then he sighed. A moment later, he burst into laughter. To Taeha, the entire situation was hilarious. Instead of feeling guilty about frightening her, he found her response amusing. He mocked her for being crazy enough to send him such a message. The fear and confusion he had created gave him satisfaction rather than regret. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to a meeting where Taeha was seated beside Rosie. The meeting eventually came to an end, and the attendees began leaving the room together. As they walked out, Rosie casually brought up the previous night's drinking. She commented that Taeha must have an unusually strong tolerance for alcohol because the drinks they had shared were extremely strong. Emily, who was walking nearby, immediately became interested. She looked surprised when she learned that Rosie and Taeha had been drinking together. Then she asked the obvious question. Had they spent the night alone together? Rosie answered confidently. Yes, Taeha answered at exactly the same time. No? The contradiction immediately created an awkward silence. Emily looked between them, clearly confused. Rosie, however, did not appear bothered at all. Taeha calmly explained himself. He had no interest in meeting women privately if there was no personal relationship between them. His words indirectly destroyed the impression Rosie had been trying to create. But Rosie refused to surrender. She playfully asked whether his answer would be different if the woman were someone he actually knew. Taeha did not hesitate. No, that would never happen. Rosie laughed. She suggested that perhaps he might change his mind after meeting the right woman. Taeha remained completely unmoved. He calmly told her that he highly doubted that would ever happen. Then he delivered the final blow. She was simply not his type. There was no ambiguity in his answer. He was making it perfectly clear that he had no romantic interest in her. Yet Rosie was not ready to give up. Instead of becoming embarrassed, she became curious. She wanted to know what kind of woman Taeha actually liked. Taeha looked directly at her. He did not pause. My ideal type is a beautiful, older woman, around 34. Then he simply walked away. Rosie remained standing there. Emily stared after him in confusion. She could not understand what had just happened. She wondered whether Taeha genuinely disliked Rosie so much that he had simply invented an absurd answer to get rid of her. Rosie, however, reacted differently. A quiet smile appeared on her face. She laughed softly. His answer had sounded too sincere. That was what bothered her. Everyone else believed that Taeha had simply been trying to escape the conversation, but Rosie could not shake the feeling that he had actually meant what he said. Her thoughts returned to the previous night. Before Taeha had left, Rosie had offered him a drink. She had teasingly told him to think about the person who had ordered it for him before drinking. Taeha had accepted the glass without hesitation. He had not looked suspicious. He had not questioned her intentions. He simply drank the entire glass in one go. Rosie had been surprised by his confidence. She had jokingly asked what he would have done if she had secretly put something into the drink. Taeha had looked directly at her. His answer had been calm and confident. He knew exactly who she was. And he did not believe she had the courage to tamper with his drink. The certainty in his voice had caught Rosie completely off guard. Now, remembering that moment, she sighed with a faint smile. She jokingly muttered that she almost regretted not actually putting something into his drink. But even she knew she did not mean it seriously. Several days passed after Haesoo received the mysterious photograph. Despite thinking about it again and again, she never discovered who had sent it. She also never learned what the sender truly wanted. The only thing she knew for certain was that the message had not been sent with good intentions. Someone wanted to disturb her. Someone wanted to make her afraid. Perhaps someone wanted her to doubt Taeha. Eventually, Haesoo forced herself to stop thinking about it. She told herself that constantly worrying would accomplish nothing. If she continued staring at the photograph and imagining every possible explanation, she would only make herself suffer. Most importantly, she decided not to tell Taeha. He was already far away. There was nothing he could do from such a distance, and she did not want to burden him with another problem. There was another reason as well. Haesoo could not bear the thought of telling him that, even for a brief moment, she had questioned whether the man in the photograph was actually him. She trusted Taeha. At least she wanted to trust him completely. So she kept everything to herself. She returned to her daily routine and focused on her work at the cafe. She smiled when she needed to smile. She spoke with her coworkers. She continued working as though nothing had happened. But inside, the photograph remained. One day, while she was busy with her duties, one of her male coworkers approached her. Haesoo. She looked up. The man held out a small piece of chocolate. Would you like one? She looked at him in surprise. He explained that she looked as though her blood sugar might be dropping. Haesoo smiled gently and accepted it. Thank you. The simple gesture made her feel slightly better. The coworker then turned toward another colleague and offered her a piece as well. The woman thanked him. Someone else immediately complained that they had been forgotten. Where's mine? The man laughed and told them there was no chocolate left for them. The comment quickly turned into playful teasing. The two began joking with each other, pretending to be offended while everyone around them laughed. The atmosphere inside the cafe became warm and cheerful. For a moment, Haesoo simply watched them. She smiled quietly. Yet the loneliness inside her did not disappear. She was surrounded by people. She could hear laughter. She was part of the conversation. And still, she felt completely alone. Her mind continued returning to everything that had happened during the previous few days. No matter how normal she tried to make her life appear, the uncertainty remained buried inside her. She was physically present in the cafe. Emotionally, however, she felt as though she were standing somewhere far away from everyone else. Outside the cafe, a car slowly came to a stop. A bodyguard sat inside with a mysterious man. Before the man stepped out, the bodyguard gave him several careful instructions. He warned him not to act recklessly. Everything needed to be investigated thoroughly before he made any move. The bodyguard reminded him of Taeha's reputation. Taeha had once been bold enough to walk directly into a dangerous bar alone. A man like that would never simply leave Haesoo without protection. The bodyguard believed Taeha had almost certainly arranged for people to watch over her. That meant the mysterious man needed to be patient. He could not rush. He needed to wait for the right opportunity. If that opportunity did not appear naturally, the bodyguard suggested another method. Money. He told the man to use money to persuade anyone who might be useful. If necessary, he could even use his name to get people to cooperate. According to the bodyguard, Taeha did not have many genuine allies within his own family. That weakness could be exploited. The mysterious man listened carefully. Then he stepped out of the vehicle. He disappeared from sight, leaving the bodyguard behind. Later that evening, Haesoo finally finished her shift. She left the cafe and began walking home alone. The streets were relatively quiet. Her thoughts were still occupied by the same things they had been for days. The photograph, Taeha, the mysterious message, the possibility that someone was targeting him. She walked slowly, lost in thought. Then, after only a short distance, she stopped. Someone was standing in front of her. A man. He appeared to have been waiting specifically for her. Haesoo's entire body froze. She looked at him, unable to understand why he was there. The stranger calmly greeted her. For a moment, she could not respond. Then she recognized him. Her eyes widened. The blood seemed to drain from her face. The man standing before her was none other than Taeha's cruel and dangerous older brother. And now, he was standing directly in front of Haesoo. Taeha had been waiting for Haesoo. He stood there as though he already knew exactly when she would appear. The moment Haesoo looked up and noticed him standing in her path, she stopped immediately. For a brief moment, her heart seemed to stop. The man standing before her looked exactly like Taeha. The resemblance was so perfect that Haesoo almost doubted her own eyes. The same face, the same features, and the same unmistakable appearance made it difficult for her to understand what she was seeing. The man calmly greeted her. Then, without saying much, he removed his glasses. His face became even clearer. There was no longer any room for doubt. Although he looked exactly like Taeha, he was not Taeha. He was someone else. He introduced himself as Taeha's twin brother. Haesoo could not respond. She simply stared at him in disbelief. She had known Taeha for so long, yet she had never imagined that there could be another person in the world who looked exactly like him. Then another thought suddenly struck her. The photograph. The mysterious photograph she had received several days earlier. The face in that picture was the same face she was looking at now. Her expression immediately changed. Panic took over. Without asking another question, Haesoo turned around and ran. She did not know where she was going. She only knew that she wanted to get away from him. Taeha watched her disappear for a moment. A puzzled expression crossed his face. Then a faint smile appeared. He seemed almost amused. "Why are you running away already?" Before Haesoo could get very far, Taeha quickly caught up with her. He reached out, grabbed her, and pulled her back. She tried to move away, but he held her firmly enough to stop her. His voice remained calm. "You should be careful." Haesoo looked at him nervously. Taeha continued. "If you keep behaving this recklessly, you might lose your life before you even get another chance to see your boyfriend." His words sent a cold wave of fear through her. Haesoo's face became pale. She looked at him as though she were standing in front of someone genuinely dangerous. Finally, she could not endure the fear anymore. "Why are you doing this to me?" Instead of answering seriously, Taeha laughed. He seemed to find her fear entertaining. "You already think I'm a villain?" He smiled. "I haven't even done anything yet." The more frightened she looked, the more amused he became. He almost seemed disappointed that she had already decided what kind of person he was. "Honestly," he continued, "the way you look at me makes me want to become the person you think I am." Haesoo remained silent. Taeha enjoyed watching her struggle, but after a moment, his expression softened slightly. "Don't be so afraid." Then he offered her a deal. "I'll let you go." Haesoo looked at him suspiciously. "But first, answer one question." He looked directly into her eyes. "Who do you think I really am?" His question immediately brought Taeha to her mind. A memory suddenly returned. She remembered one evening when she and Taeha had been walking together. It had been late. Taeha had gently told her that she should hurry home because it was dangerous to remain outside so late. She had told him that he should go home as well, but Taeha had simply answered that there was nobody waiting for him. At the time, she had not thought much about those words. Now, standing in front of Taeha, they sounded completely different. Haesoo realized something. Taeha had almost never spoken about his family. She had never asked him many questions about them either. She had always believed that if his family brought him painful memories, it would be cruel to force him to talk about them. But perhaps there was a reason he never mentioned them. Maybe, despite sharing the same blood, There had never been anyone he could truly call family. Or perhaps they had existed, but they had become so distant from him that they were no different from strangers. Haesoo slowly returned to the present. She looked at Taeha. Then she asked the question that had been troubling her. "Were you the one who sent me that photograph?" Taeha did not deny it. Instead, he smiled. He asked whether the photograph had hurt her. Had she looked at it and believed that Taeha was with another woman? His tone was deliberately provocative. He clearly enjoyed the fact that she had been unable to tell the difference between him and Taeha. The two brothers had identical faces, and Taeha was proud of the confusion that had allowed him to manipulate her emotions. But Haesoo refused to give him the reaction he wanted. She gathered herself, then she looked directly at him. "You and Taeha are not alike." Taeha raised an eyebrow. Haesoo continued. "You may have the same face, but that's where the similarity ends." Her voice became stronger. "Taeha is taller than you. He has warmth in the way he carries himself. He listens to people sincerely." Taeha remained silent. Haesoo continued describing him. "To me, Taeha is much more handsome." She paused. "Not because his face is attractive, it's because of what people can see in his actions." Her eyes softened as she spoke. "He's honest, he's relaxed, he's kind." Then she added that he was almost foolishly kind. Everything she said made the difference between the two brothers clearer. They might have shared the same appearance, but to her, their personalities could not have been more different. Haesoo realized that she was no longer simply defending Taeha. She was describing why she loved him. She also admitted that she felt guilty for ever believing the person in the photograph could have been Taeha. Now that she was looking directly at Taeha, she understood her mistake. Taeha's eyes had always been different. His eyes carried warmth, patience, kindness. There was a quiet gentleness in them that could never belong to someone like Taeha. She could never confuse those eyes again. Taeha became curious. "If that's what Taeha is like, then what does that make me?" Haesoo looked him up and down. After a brief hesitation, she answered honestly. "You look like a thug." Taeha stared at her. She quickly added that perhaps calling him a thug was a little excessive. "But you definitely look like a bad person." Her words were surprisingly direct. Then she warned him. "Don't ever send a photograph like that again just to hurt Taeha." She reminded him that Taeha already carried enough problems. He did not need someone deliberately making his life more difficult. Having said everything she wanted to say, Haesoo turned around. This time she walked away. She did not look back. Taeha remained where he was. His eyes followed her until she disappeared from view. A faint smile appeared on his face. "She really is completely wrapped around Taeha's finger." He shook his head. "How did that idiot manage to melt a woman's heart so completely?" Meanwhile, Haesoo continued walking. She had put some distance between herself and Taeha, but the feeling that he might still be following her refused to disappear. She tightened her fists. Fear slowly returned. The person she wanted most in a situation like this was Taeha, but he was far away. She could not simply call him and expect him to appear beside her. She began wondering what she should do. Should she avoid going home? Would going somewhere else be safer? Her thoughts became darker. She even began questioning whether Taeha might actually be capable of murder. Taeha had always been unbelievably kind. But could someone who looked exactly like him really be the complete opposite? Before she could settle her thoughts, she heard footsteps behind her. Someone was approaching. It was Taeha. He caught up with her again. Instead of leaving her alone, he continued playing with her fear. He casually suggested even darker possibilities. "What if I've already killed someone?" Haesoo became tense. "What if I'm a psychopath?" he continued. "What if I enjoy hurting people until they're unable to walk?" He clearly wanted to frighten her. But before he could continue, Haesoo interrupted him. She asked something completely unexpected. "How old are you?" Taeha stopped. Haesoo looked directly at him. "You're probably younger than me." Her expression became serious. "If that's true, why are you speaking to me so casually when we just met?" She told him that he should show proper respect to someone older than himself. Then she pushed him lightly and walked away. Taeha stood there in disbelief. His attempt to intimidate her had completely failed. Instead of becoming terrified, she had scolded him. He watched her leave with an irritated expression. She really is insane. Haesoo did not turn around. She continued walking. Taeha remained behind. Even after she had gone some distance, he called out one final time. Are you really not going to stop? His voice echoed behind her. Haesoo ignored him. She did not slow down. Eventually, Taeha stopped calling. He lowered his eyes toward the ground. Something near his foot caught his attention. It was insignificant. Yet somehow that small detail triggered a memory. His expression changed. Suddenly, he was no longer thinking about Haesoo. He was remembering his childhood. A familiar voice echoed in his mind. Do you still cry every night? The memory was strangely vivid. Taeha stood silently as the words replayed in his head. The arrogance he had displayed moments earlier disappeared. For the first time, his face revealed something deeper. Pain. He looked down at his shoes. After a long silence, he gave a dry, humorless laugh. He shook his head. Everything about this is completely messed up. Then he remained silent. The brief moment revealed something hidden beneath his usual cruelty. Even Taeha had memories he did not want to remember. The story then shifted to Yunari. She was happily talking with one of her colleagues while showing her a photograph. It was a picture of Ari standing beside Minchan. The moment her colleague saw the man in the photograph, she was surprised. Is that really your boyfriend? Ari smiled proudly. Yes. She could not hide how impressed she was with him. She pointed out how handsome he was. Even though Minchan was 34 years old, he looked considerably younger. To Ari, he was exactly what she had always wanted. Her colleague reluctantly agreed. She admitted that Minchan was extremely handsome. She even joked that his face was so memorable that people at a wedding would probably still be talking about him 10 years later. Then she jokingly asked whether Ari had edited the photograph. The man looked almost too perfect. Ari immediately denied it. No, it's completely natural. She insisted that Minchan really looked like that. Her colleague remembered something Ari had previously mentioned. She had always said that Minchan hated having his picture taken. So why had he suddenly agreed? Ari's smile became even bigger. He proposed to me. Her colleague nearly choked on her drink. Ari explained that Minchan had decided he could not wait any longer. He wanted them to get married. She happily began talking about their future together. She even imagined their first child. She wanted a son who looked exactly like Minchan. Her colleague stared at her. Are you seriously thinking about all of that already? Ari confidently said yes. She was already imagining their future family. When her colleague asked where the proposal had happened, Ari explained that it had taken place at a hotel. It had been a genuine marriage proposal. They had originally planned to choose their wedding rings together. But Minchan had surprised her by buying her a very expensive handbag instead. Her colleague looked at the bag Ari was holding. You're carrying it right now, aren't you? Ari instinctively tightened her grip. Then she hesitated. No, not this one. She quickly added that she would bring the expensive one another day. As she spoke, a brief memory passed through her mind. She remembered standing with Minchan while watching fish swim peacefully together. The memory made her smile. Elsewhere, Taeha was sitting quietly inside a cafe. A plate of dessert sat in front of him. Across the table was his close friend, Jae. Jae seemed eager to bring up something he had recently heard. With a teasing smile, he mentioned that a male co-worker had apparently given Taeha a box of chocolates. What made the story even more interesting was the man's age. He was only 25. Jae clearly found the situation amusing. So is it true? Taeha did not answer. He simply continued eating. Jae waited. Still nothing. Taeha showed absolutely no interest in defending himself or explaining what had happened. His silence only made Jae more curious. At that moment, a waitress approached their table carrying a bottle of wine. She looked slightly uncertain, as though she were checking whether she had come to the correct table. The atmosphere remained strangely quiet. Jae was still waiting for an answer. Taeha continued eating his dessert. He had apparently decided that silence was the easiest response. Later, Taeha left the cafe after meeting with a businessman. The two men exchanged a formal handshake before saying goodbye. The businessman walked away. Taeha was about to leave as well. Then something caught his attention. Above the cafe was a wedding dress showroom. A beautiful gown was displayed prominently behind the glass. Taeha stopped. He stared at it. The name of the boutique was written near the entrance, Valerian, New York. He continued looking at the dress. It was elegant and carefully designed, and something about the display seemed to hold his attention. Then Rosie appeared behind him. She smiled playfully. "Isn't it a little early for you to be looking at wedding dresses?" Taeha did not immediately answer. Rosie pointed out that he seemed unable to take his eyes away from the display. She joked that wedding dresses were usually much more interesting to women than men. Then she looked at the gown herself. It really is beautiful. She mentioned that she had heard wedding dresses were surprisingly heavy. Apparently, brides sometimes had to kick the bottom of the dress forward with their feet just to walk comfortably. Even so, she admitted that she felt jealous of whoever would eventually wear such a beautiful gown. Then she looked at Taeha. "If you're the groom," she said, "I'm sure you'll buy the woman you love something even more beautiful." Her teasing tone slowly disappeared. There was something she had wanted to ask him for some time. Rosie gathered her courage. Then she looked directly at him. "Are you seeing someone?" Taeha remained silent. Once again, he gave her no answer. He neither confirmed nor denied that there was someone special in his life. Rosie waited, but Taeha simply continued looking toward the wedding dress. The question remained unanswered, and the silence between them left the future of his relationship completely uncertain. Taeha and Rosie were still standing outside the wedding dress showroom when Rosie finally decided to ask the question that had been bothering her. She turned toward him and looked directly into his eyes. "Are you seeing someone?" The question was simple, but Taeha did not answer immediately. Instead, he became quiet. For a moment, an old conversation came back to him. He remembered speaking with Haesoo about their relationship and asking whether she truly wanted them to keep everything between them hidden from everyone else. Haesoo had answered without hesitation. Yes, she preferred things that way. She wanted their relationship to remain private. Remembering her answer was enough for Taeha. He already knew what he needed to say. Rather than answering Rosie's question directly, he leaned slightly toward her and calmly suggested that she ask the director instead. Their relationship had never been what Rosie seemed to imagine. The only reason they had continued meeting and spending time together was because there had never been anything Taeha actually wanted from those encounters. He looked straight at her. "You've always been very good at getting close to people who openly dislike you." His tone remained calm, but the meaning behind his words was harsh. It was almost as if he were telling her that her persistence was strange rather than admirable. Rosie did not argue. She did not defend herself. She simply turned around and walked away. After taking several steps, however, she stopped. She glanced back at Taeha. Her expression was difficult to read. As she watched him standing there, she slowly accepted something she had been unwilling to admit. He really did dislike her. There was no hidden affection behind his cold behavior. No secret attraction, no attempt to pretend. He genuinely wanted to keep his distance. Yet there was something else that bothered Rosie. His words had sounded sincere. He had not been trying to humiliate her for the sake of entertainment. He had simply told her exactly what he thought. That honesty reminded her of an earlier conversation she had shared with a friend. Her friend had once questioned the strange relationship between Rosie and Taeha, and wondered whether Taeha might eventually become interested in her. Rosie had confidently explained her own theory. When a man truly falls for someone she believed, his ideal type becomes very specific. The person he wants stops being a vague idea. Instead, he begins imagining one particular woman. Now, as Rosie looked back at Taeha, she began to believe that he really did have someone special in his life. There had to be someone. She could feel it. Her thoughts immediately turned toward the woman she suspected was behind all of this. Haesoo. Rosie's expression darkened. In her mind, she sarcastically referred to her as a beautiful 34-year-old Ajuma. The words were not sincere. They were born from jealousy and frustration. She did not like the idea that another woman had already taken a place in Taeha's heart. Meanwhile, Taeha had returned to a quiet drawing room. He sat alone with a glass of alcohol beside him, thinking about everything that had happened. As he reflected on the situation with Rosie, he realized that events had unfolded almost exactly as he had expected. That was what made Taeha dangerous. There was no way to know how closely he was watching or how much information he had already collected. Every decision, therefore, needed to be made carefully. Taeha also knew one thing about his brother better than anyone. Taeha hated being looked down on. His pride was one of the strongest forces controlling his behavior. Because of that, he would never simply rush into a situation if doing so could make him appear weak. Taeha understood that patience was his greatest advantage. He only needed to continue doing what he had been doing. Nothing more, nothing less. He had already chosen to endure everything silently. It was difficult. Leaving Haesoo behind had hurt him more than he wanted to admit. But he believed that distance was necessary. He wanted to remain beside her until the day she genuinely needed him. His thoughts then moved toward Min-chul. Min-chul had once chosen to step away because he believed that powerless love would only become a burden to Haesoo. Taeha understood that decision. But he had chosen a different path. He refused to give up. Instead, he intended to take every opportunity available to him. He wanted to gain everything he could before returning to Haesoo. His love for her gave him a reason to continue. Then his eyes moved toward the wedding dress showroom. A woman was standing near the display wearing a wedding gown, but Taeha did not really see her. In his imagination, the woman in the dress became Haesoo. That was the only bride he wanted to see. The thought brought a small smile to his face. He had never wanted to leave her behind. Every decision he was making, every sacrifice, and every difficult step he was taking was ultimately for the future he wanted to build with her. Far away, Haesoo was preparing to move. She packed her belongings carefully, thinking about the place she was finally leaving behind. The home was filled with painful memories. For that reason, she believed leaving should not make her regret anything. But while packing, her eyes fell on a Polaroid photograph. It showed her together with Taeha. She picked it up. The moment she looked at the picture, memories began returning. Not the painful ones, the happy ones, the moments they had shared, the small conversations, the quiet times, the memories that had made her feel safe. She suddenly realized that leaving was much harder than she had expected. The place might have been filled with painful memories, but it also contained moments she never wanted to forget. Another problem soon became obvious: money. Hiring a professional moving company that handled everything from beginning to end was simply too expensive. She had no choice but to rely on the people around her. Then someone called her name from behind. Taeha's friends had arrived. They immediately began helping with the move. The moment they saw Haesoo attempting to carry a heavy box, they stopped her. "You'll hurt yourself." They refused to let her continue lifting anything heavy. Instead, they told her to carry only the teddy bear Taeha had given her. Haesoo held the teddy bear carefully. A small smile appeared on her face. She carried it toward the moving truck while everyone else handled the difficult work. She was deeply grateful. Afterward, she offered them cold drinks. She even suggested ordering food for everyone, but they politely refused. They explained that Taeha had already arranged meals for them. Then they joked that once Taeha returned, they would make him treat them again. With their help, the move was completed much more smoothly than Haesoo had expected. What had initially seemed exhausting became surprisingly manageable. As she settled into her new home, Haesoo began thinking about what had happened after Taeha left. She remembered the last moments before his departure. She had spoken harshly to him. Those were the last words she had given him. Now that he was gone, she regretted them. She wished she could take them back. The new home also contained reminders of Taeha. His presence seemed to exist in the smallest details. It was almost as though he had quietly arranged things so that she would never feel completely alone. Without realizing it, Haesoo began hanging her clothes in exactly the same way she had when Taeha was around. She placed the Polaroid photograph somewhere she could see it every day. Then she started counting the days until he would return. They were separated by 13 long hours. But distance did not stop Taeha from worrying about her. He continued asking whether she was eating properly. He wanted to know whether she was sleeping enough. Those simple questions reminded Haesoo how deeply he cared. Because of that, she began making a sincere effort to take care of herself. She wanted to stay healthy. She wanted to be well when he returned. Somewhere inside, she believed that if she looked after herself, Taeha would somehow feel it, despite the distance between them. Summer continued. Then an early tropical night storm arrived over Seoul. The humidity became heavy. Rain poured continuously across the city. Every time Haesoo felt the cool air against her skin or heard the rain striking the windows, she thought about Taeha. The weather itself became another reminder of him. She missed him deeply. She wished he were beside her. The story then returned to the party. Taeha and Rosie were once again in the same room. Rosie sat comfortably on a sofa with a drink in her hand. Taeha stood nearby. Jae watched them from a distance. He still could not understand Rosie. Weeks had passed. Taeha had ignored her repeatedly. Yet Rosie showed almost no embarrassment. She did not seem humiliated. She did not appear particularly wounded. She simply continued behaving as though nothing had happened. Jae found the situation increasingly uncomfortable. From his perspective, Taeha probably looked unreasonable to everyone else. He wondered whether Taeha realized how cold he appeared in front of other people. The problem was that most guests did not know the entire story. They only saw a man treating a woman with obvious indifference. Considering Taeha's family background and social position, Jae imagined that many of the guests were probably wondering why he was behaving so harshly toward Rosie. Jae also thought about Haesoo. She was gentle. She was kind. And he could not imagine her dealing with someone as persistent as Rosie. For that reason, he sincerely hoped the two women would never meet. It would only create unnecessary trouble. Before Jae could think any further, someone approached him. It was Mikasa, the director's daughter. She immediately told him to stop Taeha. Jae was irritated by her tone. What annoyed him even more was the way she referred to Taeha as his master. Jae rejected that description immediately. Taeha was his employer. He was not some servant or slave. Mikasa casually replied that, from her perspective, the two sounded almost identical. Jae sarcastically admitted that she had a point. But he continued thinking about how the situation must appear to outsiders. People were already accustomed to judging Taeha. His family background made him an easy target. Jae remembered how people had treated him in the past. The boys often bullied him. The girls, on the other hand, tended to like him and treat him kindly. Those experiences had shaped his reputation. People had already decided what kind of person he was. Jae believed that even if Taeha tried to become friendlier now, it would not necessarily change their opinions. Pretending to be nice would not erase years of judgment. Mikasa listened quietly. Still, she admitted that the situation bothered her. She looked toward Taeha and Rosie. The tension between them was obvious. They were physically close enough to appear as though they were together, yet emotionally they seemed impossibly far apart. Mikasa could not understand why the atmosphere between them was so cold. A short while later, another guest approached Rosie. The person casually asked whether she and Taeha had attended the party together as partners. Rosie laughed. She openly admitted that she had already been rejected. Apparently, she was simply not Taeha's type. Then she turned the question toward Taeha. She jokingly mentioned the rumor that he preferred a woman approximately 10 years older than himself. The guest eventually excused himself and walked away. Once they were alone again, Rosie's playful attitude changed. She began talking about powerful families. She remarked that heirs often had countless descendants, both legitimate and illegitimate. Then she made another sarcastic comment. If Taeha's partner really was a 34-year-old woman, she suggested, there would be no hope for him within the Tyson family, even if they married immediately. Rosie continued speaking while holding Taeha's drink. She watched him closely, clearly waiting for some kind of reaction, but Taeha remained silent. He did not defend himself. He did not argue. He did not even look particularly bothered. He simply refused to give her the response she wanted. The silence became increasingly tense. Then, unexpectedly, someone mentioned a name. Haesoo Taeha. The moment Taeha heard it, his attention shifted. The name clearly caught him off guard. Before the situation could develop any further, someone quickly interrupted. They asked the person who had mentioned the name to come with them for a moment. The conversation abruptly ended. Taeha remained silent. Rosie watched him carefully. Jae looked on from a distance, and the sudden appearance of Haesoo Taeha's name left behind another unanswered question. Why had that name affected Taeha so strongly? Who was Haesoo Taeha? And why had the mention of that name changed the atmosphere so suddenly? For now, no one had an answer. The evening continued, but the uneasiness remained. Something was clearly moving beneath the surface. Taeha knew that. Rosie sensed it. And somewhere far away, Haesoo remained completely unaware that the complicated events surrounding the people she loved were continuing to unfold. The distance between them was 13 hours, but emotionally, the gap seemed much larger. And as the night continued, the secrets surrounding Taeha, his family, Rosie, and the mysterious name that had just been mentioned only became deeper.